Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our June 7th regularly scheduled workshop. Before we begin the work of the district, let us stand for a moment of silence, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have no public input, so we'll get right into 3.01 legislative update from Gray Robinson.
Good morning, I'm Angie Langley. Thank you for the opportunity to come address you guys and give you an update on this legislative session. Chris Carmody, I was just texting, he is pulling into the parking lot as we speak, so he will be right in. I know Robert Stewart is going to be joining us by phone. He was not able to be here in person. So.
And I am on the line. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes. Good morning,
Lord.
Robert. We can hear you.
How long can you tread
Okay,
water?
great. Good morning.
So I guess we can just go ahead and begin with Robert. I know he has the majority of the update for you guys, everything specific, especially with Lake County, and I know that especially during the legislative session, he speaks to our awesome superintendent, I think almost daily, or at least emails just about daily. So we, as always, appreciate the opportunity to represent you guys in Tallahassee. And with that, I'll kick it over to Robert.
Great. Good morning, everybody, and great to be with you. Thank you, first of all, for your flexibility and allowing me to do this from the road. We are on a long scheduled trip to see my wife's side of the family. She's from Louisiana. And so for the next couple of weeks, we are bouncing around the state of Louisiana, seeing family that we haven't seen in about a year and a half. And so as we speak right now, I'm actually at the Busy Bee in Live Oak, headed north and westbound towards Louisiana. So thank you for your flexibility in allowing me to join you remotely. Chris is going to be giving you kind of a general legislative session update, kind of what happened up there this year beyond just the issues that we worked on behalf of the school district. But kind of to touch on that very briefly, I think the most important thing to highlight is just how different and strange of a legislative session this was. Obviously, given the pandemic protocols and the restrictions related to access to the building and kind of the changes of the way that advocacy happened this session, it was one where if those of you that come to Legislative Day for Lake County every year, for instance, will know that there wasn't a standard day or set of days where you run around the Capitol and have a series of meetings and sort of spend the entire day in and out of committee rooms. This year was quite different in that the Senate in particular did not allow for any in-person meetings in the Capitol at all. All public testimony for the Florida Senate was given remotely from the Donald Tucker Center, which is the Civic Center in downtown Tallahassee. The House did allow for some in-person meetings and for some public access, but it was quite limited. First come, first served basis for committees. If you had a meeting inside the Capitol with a legislator, you had to be escorted in and escorted out. You couldn't sort of roam the building or loiter, as they lovingly called it this session, the way that we usually would. And so as a result, advocacy changed in a significant way. What used to be, meetings in the Capitol from sunup to sundown became much more focused on text messages and phone calls in order to get in touch with members and to make our case to them about various issues that we were working on your behalf. From the macro level, on the budget side, and has Chris arrived yet? I didn't know if he was there. If he wanted, I don't want to step on his toes of what he was going to talk about in terms of general updates. Are you there yet, Chris?
Good morning, Robert. He's here.
Okay, great. Yeah, Chris, you want to give kind of the general overview, and then I'll hop into our stuff for specific on the district?
Yes. But you're not echo. I mean, I don't think you're.
Yeah, Robert, you can hear.
Yeah, and I can hear you as well. I'm gonna mute while you're talking, Chris, so I don't accidentally echo.
Perfect. I apologize. I was a few minutes late. I was actually parked trying to explain to my wife how to disconnect her phone from a Bluetooth speaker that our kids somehow connected this morning. She was trying not to have all her calls played over a Bluetooth speaker. So apologies for that. And Robert started with a good overview. By the way, good morning. And good to see everyone. Good to be seen, right? Public. As you know, every legislative session is defined by the budget, and we can get into some of the weeds on that, and certainly do a high-level approach to that. But this session, and we saw the seeds of the last session, was also defined by what they did around COVID-19. Robert gave sort of a preview of some of the logistical things that they did to work their way through the process, and to say it was a weird session would be an understatement. We joked we had little e-passes when we wanted to go testify. If anyone remembers that term for this, if you want to go testify in the House, they gave you a little pass that you could get to go in and testify in committee.
Excuse me, just one second.
Sure.
Let's wait until we get your mic working. So, because those that are watching.
Perfect.
Okay, go ahead.
No problem, Chairman. Thank you. So it was definitely a different time, but one thing they had to do was that budget. And as you saw, they passed a $101.5 billion budget. It helps when you had $10 billion come from the feds, as you recall from the American Recovery Plan. And then as well as we've seen, probably here locally and of course around the state, is the economy has continued to improve. I think Florida just had the 9th month in a row of positive growth, and not just positive growth, but exceeding the expectations of what the revenue estimators projected that we would have back last July when they did the projection for this year. So things are moving in the right direction from an economic perspective and tax collection revenue in Florida as well. The feds threw in that $10 billion. The governor, when he got it, he vetoed $1.5 billion. I don't think that number was on accident. I don't think he wanted to pass 100. I didn't think he wanted to be the first $100 billion budget. So it's just a hair below $100 billion as far as the final budget that he was passed. $1 billion of that veto, actually 1.35 of that veto, was federal dollars, which essentially is just going to reset it to go to next year. $1 billion was the emergency response fund, and then $350 million was what they had in the rainy day fund. So, which essentially just stays in the rainy day fund. The fact that they can spend the federal dollars next year. Of that $10 billion before the vetoes, they only spent $6.7 billion. So they had $3.3 billion that they were going to have for next year, and now with these vetoes, they're going to have almost close to $5 billion that they can work with next year from the federal dollars, which is great from a budgeting perspective. Again, now we don't have to worry too much about how quickly the economy recovers. They'll have funds both for teachers' raises, not on wood, not to be too presumptuous, but some of the things that they're looking to do, and they look for funding, they'll have that funding. But no surprise here, the large parts of the budget were K-12 and Medicaid. Unfortunately, neither had, Robert will get into, and I don't want to steal his comments. We had base student allocation increases as well. And then on Medicaid, there were no cuts, which is fortunate, because Lake is no different than any other of the 66 other counties. We have our fair share of those who are on Medicaid rolls in the states, and cuts to that, which they were projecting before session, would have been devastating. On COVID-19 relief, this is something that they did not hide as far as they did it early on and often in the session as they talked about COVID-19 was there was a bill that started as one for healthcare and one for nonprofits, government, including school districts, and for-profit companies, and eventually merged. But essentially what it did was any claim not filed before the effective date of that bill could not be filed unless you could show that the business, the school district, the nonprofit, or whatever it was worse than negligent. You had to show that they were either intentionally negligent or malfeasance or what have you, just something worse than a negligent standard, which is a really tough standard to hit if you're trying to sue. As well, there were some other benchmarks that you had to show that would really identify that you got COVID-19 from being in this spot, in this place, on this particular date. There's no question about it. If you can prove all that and they weren't following CDC guidelines and or state guidelines, then yeah, your claim can go forward and probably should go forward if you can prove all that and show that someone was negligent. But that was a nice relief, because now school districts, our businesses here in our community and across the state, as well as our hospitals, our frontline workers especially, they don't have to live in fear of being overly sued by friends in the child law. So that passes. Of course, there was pandemic fraud relief. Sadly, our Florida is no different than any other 49 other states that, when there's trying times, whether it's a hurricane, a natural disaster, or a pandemic, people take advantage of people's fear, and frauds are committed. So there was some legislation passed to really crack down on those who committed fraud. I mean, terrible stuff like offering fake vaccines. That sounds terrible, but people were trying that as well as other fake treatments. But they cracked down on that. An interesting one that's been in the works for years now, kind of pivot back over to Robert, that I thought would be worth noting is you probably heard for a while online sales tax. Going into this session, 46 other states had passed online sales tax. I bet if I asked everyone behind me and in front of me to raise their hand, in Florida, you were already required to pay sales tax on every purchase. The only difference is if you order through a seller not like Amazon that collects for you, but like an Etsy or somewhere else, you got to write a check or to the Department of Revenue. And I'm sure everybody was, every time they got that bag on Etsy, would write that check and send it out to Tallahassee. Of course, no one was doing this, and the state had estimated that was about $1.3 billion in revenue that the state was losing on a tax that was already on the books. And so for years, there have been both Republicans and Democrats have been saying, hey, we need to enforce this. We're throwing away money, and it's also not fair to all of our retail and office space leasers in the state that have a physical presence here. And so a pandemic and a recession through a pandemic where everything goes online certainly helps get people motivated. The big rub, and we'll talk about that, was there was a lot of legislators, mainly on the Republican side, that didn't want it to be just a windfall. They wanted it to be revenue neutral of some sort. So what they ultimately did was they passed it to enforce the online sales tax. So now all the retailers, and it's usually if you have either so many customers or so much in sales in the state of Florida, almost like a long arm statute for lawyers and the internet knows how to reach out. You would have to collect the sales tax as opposed to us as consumers paying it on our own. Here's what they're going to do with the money. They're going to take the initial proceeds from the fund and refill the unemployment compensation insurance fund. As you can imagine, that was completely depleted during the recession as we were paying unemployment across the state. Now, and they were going to replenish it to $4.017 billion. Now, it's not empty now. People are hiring again and they're paying into that fund. But so it'll take about 2 to 2.5, 3 years for them to completely replenish that fund, collecting about $1 billion a year to the state. But this is also with employers. Every time someone makes a hire, that they get replenished into that fund as well. So when they're done replenishing that, when it gets to that number, they're going to then offset the business rent tax, which is right now at 5.5%. As many of you know, Florida is the only state other than the city of New York that collects a sales tax on the rent you pay. And so they're looking to reduce that to 2 cents whenever the unemployment compensation fund is filled. So a lot of folks are projecting by 2023 or 2024, it'll go to that. So a win across the board. And the final thing that was supported the sales tax and affects all of us here is if you had to sell your home, you're familiar with the dock stamp tax, or you buy a home, what have you. For years, that was dedicated to the Sadowski Trust Fund, which most folks relate to affordable housing. The bad side of that, despite the $400+ million that was collecting in recent years, the legislature pretty much, except for last year, was sweeping that fund into general revenue to pay for everything else. There was a drumbeat from Lake County and all the other counties, and most folks who just generally see what was happening in Florida, that it was getting really expensive to live here, to avoid the sweep. And last year they didn't sweep it, but as you all know, because of COVID-19, the governor was doing some vetoes, had to make room. He swept half of that, or vetoed half of that. This year what they did is they said, after some negotiation with the governor's office and the presiding officers, they said, we're going to take that $400 million, or just think of it as a piece of pie, and cut it into a half goes to Sadowski, or traditional Sadowski affordable housing, and then the other half will be split in 2 to go to Resiliency Funding and go to wastewater and water quality funding. Resiliency is what it sounds like. It's a lot South Florida, but it also could be here in Central Florida for any kind of flooding issues that you have that to help the state. Wastewater and water quality is also what that sounds like, right? We have a lot of water issues in our state. We saw all the spring sheds we have, and they want to do that. The good news, if you're an affordable housing advocate, and I think we all here, especially in the school district, because we care about all of our students that need to have an opportunity to live near their schools and live in our community, is that $200 million won't be swept going forward. And they put language in statute that makes it really hard for them to sweep it going forward. So even though it's not the full pie or the full apple, if you will, half of when you're getting swept every year, half of what you actually deserve is actually kind of a win. And that number is going to only go up. If you might have noticed, we kind of have an active real estate market. So next year, that number is going to be pretty high. and we expect with all the growth expected in Florida that will continue to go up. So that was a big win, and I'll close with this. Robert's like, hey, he gets me. On that online sales tax, the interesting part of that is also local revenue as well. They projected 1.25, 1.3 billion. Of that, about 200 million was local infrastructure sales surtax, that kind of revenue that goes in the locals. How much Lake County will get and what they can spend it on, is obviously in statute, but how much they get is yet to be determined. The best guesstimate I've heard is, say, take your traditional infrastructure sales surtax collection last year, or for the state as it was divided amongst 67 counties, and if you got 10% in Lake County of that, then you're probably going to get 10% of what that online sales tax is. Again, it depends on what our citizens here in Lake County are doing. Are they buying online or retail or physical retail? And probably like everywhere else in the state, it's a hybrid. But you can expect a very similar distribution to what you were getting on the traditional sales tax. So that'll be found money for the county that can be distributed on the various projects that qualify. So just something to keep in mind there. But all in all, like Robert said, and I'll shift it to him, it was an interesting session. It was certainly interesting in the K-12 space, and there was a lot of positive. There was some stuff that we got to work on, and I know we'll probably have some conversations on that. But with that, Robert, anything on the big picture I missed before I take it back to you?
Excuse me, who's going to speak to equity compression? What happened?
I think Robert's going to touch on that, and then we'll get to that more largely. Did you catch that, Robert?
Yeah, I got it. And can y'all hear me still?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. No, great. Thanks, Chris, for the general overview. And yeah, I'll get into some of the specifics. And Mr. Chairman, I'll get right to the compression situation. We submitted to the superintendent a very lengthy sort of all education related report a couple of weeks ago, or about a week and a half ago, I should say. And y'all may have already seen that. It's about 110 pages long. I won't obviously go through all of that. A little bit on the education funding side before I talk specifically about compression. Total FEFP funds actually was a $149 million reduction for this year over last year because of the pandemic related enrollment decline. But despite that, there was an increase in the student in the per student funds category, including a $53 1.2% increase in the BSA, and a total of 3.5%, $473 million statewide in the FEFP flexible funds, the total base funds that is your flexible money. The RLE increased, or estimated to increase by $201 million, keeping the same millage rate for next year as we had this year. You also saw a recurrence of the teacher salary increase from last year, $550 million total for the teacher salaries, of which $440 million is designed or allocated for keeping the raise from last year, and then the remaining about $110 million to go to other instructional personnel that maybe didn't receive a raise or didn't receive as much of a raise last year as they were bringing everybody to that 47,500 number. Safe Schools, $180 million. The Guardian program was refunded. That training line item was refunded at about $6.5 million. You probably read news of the $1,000 teacher bonuses that are going to go out for the pandemic. That's both teachers and all first responders in the state are receiving a $1,000 bonus. Most of that, not most, all of that comes from the federal funds that we drew down. Chris spoke to the federal funds that were received in the budget from the American Rescue Plan. That's where those monies come from. And then you saw, that was what I was going to mention. Yeah, the $1,000 full-time teacher bonuses. So specific to the compression, I'll go right into that and tell you what happened. The compression line item was funded at $50 million. Last year, you'll recall that was a $68 million number. The year before, it was about the same. The compression and hold harmless was funded at $50 million, but as you are well aware by this point, Lake County doesn't receive an allocation in that $50 million. We had been working in partnership with our other underfunded school districts, those that fall below the statewide average, to make sure that that number was funded. And so I will admit to you, surprised to when I found out that of that amount, while it was less than everybody wanted, in total, still gave no money to Lake. And so I began to obviously search very quickly for why that was. And I spent some time last week doing that due diligence, and the answer is pretty straightforward, even if it is unfortunate. And that is that because of the way that and let me back up a little bit. The compression allocation, as you may recall, started about 4 years ago as an attempt to, using that categorical, boost up those districts that fall below the statewide average. And it was meant as a temporary stopgap while the legislature did a more thorough deep dive, a more thorough review of the FEFP, and perhaps change the way things are funded, including things like the district cost differential, to provide more equity and more fairness in the system. We're now 4 or 5 years into that, and the legislature has still not been able to coalesce around a thorough review of the FEFP, nor have they been able to coalesce around what the DCD ought to look like. They did commission a study last year on the DCD, but they've not yet done anything with that study. But that's just a bit of a refresher that the compression was meant as a temporary stopgap, and that temporary stopgap has been of great help to Lake County over the last 3-4 years until we got to this year. What happened this session is that the way that the compression allocation is distributed, the metrics by which you qualify for an allocation under it are based upon where the district falls in what effectively is the current year. So as they decide what the allocation is going to be for next year, they look to this year. And this year, in the current fiscal year that ends at the end of this month, Lake County actually falls just above the statewide average. So we had a total of like $8,095 per student, just above the statewide average. And so when you fall above the statewide average, you do not qualify for an allocation under compression for next year. This year, you'll also recall that it was compression and a hold harmless related to the pandemic. And the way the hold harmless is distributed, the mechanics for that are based upon your DCD. And if your DCD for the next year is the same or higher than the current year, meaning this year that ends at the end of this month, then you don't qualify for the hold harmless either. And those metrics are the same that they've been for the last couple of years since the compression was put into place. And our DCD, I think, in the current year is 0.9805, and next year it's literally 2,000 points higher, 0.9807. And so because of those two trigger points, Blake doesn't qualify. If you look ahead to next year, and then I'll stop and happy to answer any questions. If you look ahead to, let's talk about next legislative session. If the legislature doesn't participate again in a holistic FEFP review or a holistic FEFP overhaul, like they've talked about for all these years, and if they were to fund compression again, and if that compression were to have the same metrics, which theoretically it would, if all of those other ifs were to take place, Lake County would benefit because we are going to fall below the statewide average for this coming fiscal year. We were, again, above it for the current fiscal year, even if by only a couple dollars. And looking ahead to next fiscal year, based on the worksheet numbers and our enrollment and all the projections, we are very likely to fall below it. So looking to the following, again, if they did compression the exact same, the rules remained exactly as they are today, and compression was funded, we would receive probably another sizable allocation next year. And so that is not the answer that we wanted. It's not the situation that we wanted, but it does sort of highlight the the inherent inequities in the FEFP and the need potentially, like we've talked about these workshops over the years, the need for a holistic review of the FEFP with an eye towards making sure that districts such as ours, who perennially, although this year being an exception, but perennially below the statewide average, are better taken care of, whether that be through the DCD or whether that be through another mechanism that more fairly reflects the county. Either way, the annual categorical fight is one that will continue unless and until legislature takes that holistic view that we talked about. And so that's, I'll stop there. I can talk about some of the other stuff we worked on during the session, but Mr. Chairman, knowing that this was important to get right on the table, I can stop there unless there's other questions.
Does anyone have a question or comment about that? Okay.
I figured you'd lead us off. I've got some comments, but I figured you were, with your passion, you'd want to kick us off on this.
Can I first ask Mr. Ward, is that accurate that we were about to say that? Not sure. Whether it was accurate, I mean, that's it. But I will tell you that I think that it's fool's gold because the first 5 years of my service, I chased the DCD, and then there's large districts that block this. You see more than what they put in. They block it every time. So the equity compression needs to be fully embrace and push, and it needs to be made permanent. I don't think that there's the will of the legislature over 8 years that I've been screaming about this to completely revamp and make it fair. I don't see that happening. So the equity compression is kind of our last hope. That's just my opinion on it.
So, help me understand as to why we landed above the state average. But isn't part of the reason that we were above the state average is that they used our compression from last year to factor in there?
They did that 2
The reason
years,
we were
they did 2 years ago. That's why we got last.
That's right.
Was that a question for me? I'm sorry.
No. We're having a little internal standby.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Yeah, I'll just wait for you to call me then.
Spend some time with your family for a second.
So a couple things have happened, and we've had this concern before. There's no reason for the legislators to use prior year information to determine this year's need. And because they do that, and they include the compression adjustment on top of last year. So because we got compression adjustment last year, that actually increases our state average and shows less need. So I've communicated several times that they need to take that piece out and use current information without it, because they have everything right there on the FEFP formula. They can go ahead and calculate it with today's numbers and not even worry about last year.
Well, the entire intent is for the equity adjustment to bring you to state average. It shouldn't be included in the number. That's ridiculous.
Exactly. And then the second thing is being last year, there was a lot of conversation about the DCD and making adjustments to the DCD. And one of the things that was a priority of them was to offset some of the loss that the districts that, even though they're funded higher than us, were having a decline in their DCD. And because they were seeing a decline in their DCD, they were seeing a decline in funding. So they blended the two programs together. So they have a decline in DCD mixed in with the funding mechanism for compression. And when they did that, large districts like Miami-Dade, Palm Beach County, a couple other, and I may not have the exact county names right, but these larger districts that are already funded above the state average or close to the state average are receiving a portion of the compression, and because they're so large, they take a large portion of it. So two things happen.
I almost just think it's like you're out golfing or bowling or something, and you've got a handicap, and that's allowing you to be competitive. And they say, "Oh, since you're competitive, let's take away the handicap." And now suddenly you're losing, right? You're at the bottom of the ranks again. Whereas really you just kind of have to.
If it was permanent, like you
Yeah.
suggested, then you could all day include it. If it's not permanent, we don't know if you're.
That's right. So it's not something we can plan on, which is ridiculous.
So I mean, that all that being said, I know you've had considerable passion around equitable funding for years, and how many times have we sat in these meetings going, "Oh gosh, if only we had that other $12 million, if only the state wasn't violating their own statutes." I mean, at what point do we start talking about bigger solutions?
I think maybe that discussion happens now because it's like 8 years fighting us.
Yeah.
And they are in violation of the law. one strategy, 101.62. And I think we ought to look at it, and I think we would be annoyed by, like, there's 23 districts that are below the state average, and that if we can't get their attention one way, then I think that maybe it is past time that we bring an action. Y'all have any thoughts on that?
Now they do what we gotta do.
We won't make many friends in Tallahassee, but I don't think we've got many friends now. You know?
Not basically.
No.
Okay. Next.
Well, I know we lost our champion for this when we lost Rob Bradley, and so I think that that's one of the things that I would ask you to consider is who will be our champion, since we don't seem to have one right now. And our legislative delegation, we need to get them more engaged and make sure that they're informed about our need and our position, and see if we can't within our own group find a stronger advocate for this.
Yeah, Superintendent, you said it best, and Robert and I chatted about this numerous times with Angie, and so, you know, we don't need to belabor it, but we've had some turnover in our legislative delegation over this last election cycle, and we're going to have a little bit of turnover coming up in this one. We've got this one open rate house seat coming up. You've got Keith Drew now, who has expressed a strong interest, but he's a freshman. I mean, we just call it what it is. But he's shown a lot of promise, and I think it's worth both short and long term working with him to get him better educated on our issues. Right, these aren't easy. You're coming with education. These aren't easy issues to get your arms around, but get his arms around them so that he can go fight for us both in front of and behind the scenes as well. You've got in the Senate, you've got Senator Baxley, who's likely going to be returning. We'll have to see what the seat looks like with redistricting. And you've got Kelly Stargell, who's turning out, but she's still got one more year. I think spending this summer, as they're gearing up, certainly because it's a non-election for September committee meetings, spending this summer trying to get her a little more on the same page with us, because there's certainly an appetite and a willingness from her and Senator Baxley's team to support us. But now that we've seen the casualty that can occur when we're just literally, a hair above this line, we can. I think this is the perfect excuse. And yes, we're talking about action to go. This is what's happening here. Like, and this isn't sustainable. We can't live year to year and to old habits. Mark's point, school board member. We can't have this golf handicap just yanked away. In the middle of our round, so to speak. So I think getting Senator Stargell, who's now budget chair, fully briefed up on this would also be a value, so that she knows going into that session when she looks at that K-12 budget and looks at some of the stuff around that, she at least understands how it will and won't affect us.
And I think that, again, after 8 years, you're right. Bradley was a big supporter and really promoted, and so we hang by the merits of a person advocating for us when they are clearly in violation of their own statute. So I'm over begging. I really am, like, legit, and I'm not a lawsuit guy, but I think 8 years is enough trying to get this worked out. That's where my head's at.
Yeah, and that's certainly a decision for y'all as the board to decide. You get it. That's one route. We'll obviously continue to go the route of, well, if you're suing, if that's ultimately where you guys land, we'll have two roles, right? Partly advocacy and making sure that to the extent we can, and working with our legislative delegation, our interests are well represented up there, and finding those advocates, right? Again, it was a terrible loss. Terminal gets rid of some bad ones and gets rid of some really good ones, like Senator Bradley, that clearly understand these issues. But as well, we'll obviously that's an education campaign when any of your clients are suing the state, is to help make sure that fact and fiction, facts are what's winning the day, right? This isn't anything other than just making sure that the law as it's stated is applied, and making sure that there's no blowback, or no more blowback than there would be when you go make a lawsuit.
Do you represent other districts that are in our situation?
Robert can give you a better answer to that, but I think there's one or two. Some of our folks in Tallahassee. Robert, do you know off the top of your head?
Yeah, Hillsborough is a district that I know annually falls below the statewide average that we do represent, and then of course our firm represents the school board association at the statewide level, sort of the full association. I don't know off the top of my head, Mr. Chairman, if where Hillsborough falls this year vis-a-vis the
meant $22 million.
The compression, if they're in the same situation we are or not.
But
are they asking you to advocate for this? Do they have the same passion that we do?
The passion for full equity in the way that it is discussed with you and your members here on an annual basis is not the same discussion that I hear in other districts. I mean, everybody, certainly it's universal that the school districts believe the legislature is not properly meeting the obligation or is underfunding or is shifting too much to the locals, or there in various forms there's always a concern that there's not enough money. I don't know that with any of the clients that I work with I have heard it articulated in the way that you do, just as a way of reference.
Okay, thank you. That's what I was asking.
But I'd be happy, Mr. Chairman, to check with. I think the easiest phone call that I can make to find out. Kim McDougall, who's on our team and from time to time assists with this file as needed, is our lead for the School Board Association for our firm. She would know much clearly off the top of her head whether or not others are talking about it in the same way you are, and I'll find that out and report it back to Ms. Forney.
Okay. My experience with the School Board Association is they're not going to be very interested because the larger counties that belong have the most clout. Just my experience. So that would be a credible source. But anyway, maybe we need to reach out.
Yeah, and I don't think the board itself would ever take it. The School Board Association would take a position, but she may know if others that are within that association are talking about it in the same way.
Okay, very kind. Fine, we'll move on.
Robert, did you want to finish up some of the other stuff we worked on, including some of the COVID issues?
Yeah, I think the policy issue that I will bring to your attention. You'll recall last year, it might have been 2 years ago now, we worked on providing an exception in the law for the way that you transport students to CTE programs from their high schools to a CTE program, making sure that you can do it in the most cost-effective, cost-efficient way. There was a similar issue this year that came up with some of your alternative schools around the county, and we worked directly with the legislature, with True Now and others who cared about this for us. Baxley sponsored it in the Senate, and directly with the Department of Education to potentially tweak the law again. Ultimately, that didn't happen, but not because of the lack of effort, but because of the Department of Education thinking that we can already do it, thinking we can already have the flexibility we need, and a commitment from the commissioner and of his office that if, as we begin that process, we find that we don't have what we believe we need, coming back next year to tweak the law. And so there was a ton of headway made, even if not passed in the statute this year, a ton of headway made on that topic. And then outside of the legislative session, we also assisted with various items as they arose throughout the year, including helping with expediting of an ACA permit for a testing site that y'all were trying to do, or a rapid testing site y'all were trying to do at one or more of your high schools, and we're able to help move that along so that it was ready for pre-planning before the school year opened last fall. And of course, we always remain on call for any issues that arise, whether they be at the local or at the state level, and stay in constant communication with the community.
I guess it sounds like we're in a little bit of a pause here. So just thinking about this compression piece, and I want to circle back to this teacher salary component that I think we kind of talked about pretty quickly. And I think from the state standpoint, they're just celebrating that, hey, look at this. We were able to maintain the raises you all got last year. But in reality, think about that for a second. You're going to pull the raises back from people? No. How in the world would you do that, right? So in Lake County, we ended up with, about 500,000? Scott, is that right? And the previous year was like 7 or 8 million, somewhere in that range. So when you divide that $500,000, once again, 80% to increase the starting salary, you're talking at best maybe a couple $100. And for us, it's hard to compete because at least from where I am in Lake County, I can drive to many Orange County schools quicker than I can get to a Lake County school. And when you get neighboring districts being able to get that aspirational goal, I think there's something there in the DCD that's missing when you can live in Lake, but then take advantage of the Orange County salary, and so I love that to be part of that conversation. You just can't look at the districts in individual silos because of that. that component. But then the other piece I'm thinking about here is, once again, okay, thank you state for trickling some bonuses down. But as I think about all the people that really made the schools happen for us this year, how do you tell the bus driver, hey, thanks for getting the kids to school, because otherwise we would have done it. Oh, where's the bonus from the state? Or people cleaning the school. Why is the governor not thinking about those people?
That is an outstanding.
I just don't understand.
I just read that now. This is ridiculous.
And typically we take care of those people in Lake County, but it puts us in another predicament. We speak about the dollars that we're not getting from precious money or otherwise, because they're not ever.
They're not.
It's always teachers, and we even fight
And
for
classroom
all
teachers.
instructional teachers. That's exactly right. So sometimes it's not even all of our teachers; it's just teachers who have a classroom roster attached to it. So it's made it a challenge.
Yeah. Outrageous. And then I don't even understand the attack on bright futures this year. I mean, in the middle of a pandemic, I just don't know who wakes up and says, hey, let's cut funding for kids to go to college. I just don't even understand that. And then the reliability factor. Hey, you got 100% this year, but next year we only have 80%. Following year, we only have 12% available for you. I'm sorry. Find another way to fund your college career. I mean, that just needs to be done. That kind of conversation.
And that's an important point. I should have mentioned that maybe in my overview, and really just to thank you as a board for reaching out the way that you did the moment that bill was filed. And obviously it was a member of our delegation, and Senator Baxley thought he was doing the right thing, and he fought for what he believed in. But I think you as a board, on behalf of your constituents, I have to give you a nice shout out, because we heard from you through Ms. Forney immediately upon that filing, and began engaging with the House and the Senate. Obviously, the far-reaching implications of the initial bill, came nowhere near passing, but just the discussion of it was problematic and bothersome to families and students in your districts that have relied upon this and have planned to rely upon it for some time. So kudos to you for catching it and for weighing in the way that you did.
Interestingly, I think we probably heard from more students this year about the attacks on bright futures than we did about mask mandates. Yeah. So I mean, that shows you the passion around that our students have.
I'm taking notes here, so apologize if I wasn't reacting right away to everything you're saying, but school board member, you're absolutely right. I mean, Robert said it best. He was a delegation member, and I think, the senator was certainly doing what he thought was best, but it was good to hear from Lake and others, and I think they got the message loud and clear. I'd be shocked if they do anything to mess with bright futures this coming session. It's become, in many ways, an entitlement. I don't mean that in a bad sense, but it's, hey, this has been in Florida, 30 years at least, probably. And it's, families plan their retirement, they plan their finances completely around this scholarship being available if students do well enough. It's not fair to pull that back. If they want to continue to look at tweaks, that's another conversation that pull it. Just for certain reasons, I think that conversation is dead. And this certainly leads into conversations for next session. I mentioned it briefly, but they start up in September, and so the work it's happening right now. Because while they never stop fundraising, except in 60 days they're legally not allowed to fundraise. They are certainly, unlike next summer where they'll be in full campaign mode and worried about their own offices. Most of the legislators, especially the leadership, are already making plans for next session and what bills are going to get priority, what issues are going to rise to the surface, and which ones won't. So, to the extent we want to start pursuing, for example, making sure that our bus drivers and lunch ladies and others are getting top of mind consideration when we're talking about raises and stuff next year, then now would be the time, if this is the board's direction, to start elevating those conversations as they start to, we can go meet with Chairman Fine in the House. And use K-12 and start having this conversation. Hey, by the way, this is some things we want you to consider next year. Same thing with the formula as far as working through that and then talking about equity. And then final thing I'll say, since I don't know the next time I'll be in front of you in this context, is also to pay attention to redistricting. We've had a lot of growth in Central Florida, specifically here in Lake County, and that means we're going to have some shifts in our seats. And will we have one senator for the entire county, or will we continue to go forward with a split county? Those are the decisions to be made. Like I said, Senator Starrs is terming out. There's already some folks that have lined up to replace her. And the same with the House members. Do we add a House seat, or do we just does the seat that Representative Truenow have just lose its Orange County component and just become a true Lake County seat? Some of those questions are being decided. They don't have the block level data yet. They won't expect that until September, which you all are going to probably have to deal with that too, as you guys look at your own seats and redistricting. But once they get that block level data in September or late August, you'll probably not too long thereafter start to see some maps start to percolate and some coverage on that, because they'll have to have it all done by the first week of March when they wrap up session, so that those maps are ready. And they're obviously trying to avoid what happened 10 years ago when the House maps were fine, but the Senate maps were redrawn again, and ultimately the Supreme Court, through the challenge, had to draw those. This Supreme Court's different than the Supreme Court was, and during that last cycle, it's a little more conservative. But I think precedent has been set where I don't think, not that they're intentionally trying to usurp our state constitution, but I don't think the Senate thinks they can put forward a map that, like they did 10 years ago, they're going to have to do a little more. For example, the House, 20 some odd members, or maybe even 30, were drawn out of their seat 10 years ago. So they woke up one morning and said, and their neighbor, it's kind of like y'all looking at each other in the same district now. They were sharing districts with each other, and they either had to move or decide they weren't going to run again. And some did move, and some decided not to run. In the Senate, not a single member was drawn out of the district, not one. You had some I could draw for you. You had some funky looking districts, I'll just say it like that, with like a nice square and a little elephant trunk that came over here to just grab somebody. The Supreme Court helped them fix that. The state requires them to be compact. So the way Lake is shaped, we have some unique, just actual geopolitics, the way our shape of we're not square, naturally. So it'll be interesting to see that because of the growth, we very well might likely get one senator, almost one senator completely dedicated to this county, which would be both an opportunity and you lose a little, right? With 2 senators, that's an advantage there. We may have 3 House members. That probably will shift less. I think more than anything, you might just see Representative Trunow's seat being Apopka just become a true Lake County seat potentially. But pay attention to that, because that will have an effect short and long term on how we advocate for you and how you advocate for yourself. Something podcast. So just wanted to make sure you put that on the radar. Robert, anything I missed? I'm sure I did.
No, I think important to note the redistricting changes. So that was a nice addition, and I think that's all I've got for the moment.
It's important to begin those conversations about true school district government, which is our classified workers. How do you get that conversation? So now's the time to start talking.
Yes.
Start talking.
Noted.
Okay. Thank y'all very much.
And I would just ask that, I know this was a quite unusual session. Normally I would be up there and have an opportunity as well to meet with whoever y'all were able to get us in front of. And so we do have I know that Representative Truenow, Luke and I've had several opportunities to meet with him. He is very open. He wants to learn, and he's certainly a huge advocate. And so I would like to your help in getting in front of all of our members of our delegation to really talk about and educate them on where we are with this compression adjustment, as well as our other priorities as we prepare for September. I've not had much luck getting in front of one in particular. The others are always open, just that they weren't available either this past session. And so that was...
We'll get offline and talk. And for a couple of the members, as you know, not to pick on our senators because they're wonderful, but because neither one of them live in our county, they come into the county when they come in for events, so that may be where we might need to do a day trip up to or down. We'll figure that out.
And I think the last time I got about 5 minutes with them, so
okay.
It's hard to say much in 5 minutes. So.
We'll get more than 5 this next time, but we'll make sure, because you're right, that it's important. So Robert, you and I will touch base and we'll get with Superintendent on that.
Absolutely. And thank y'all so much again for letting me appear remotely. I'm so sorry I couldn't meet with you in person.
Great. Thanks so much for calling in, and safe travels.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. 3.02, we're done.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, board, board chair, superintendent. I have with me Frances Sellis, who has led the committee for our student progression plan updates, and she is here today to present some of those updates and revisions to you. It's that time of year again, so I will let Ms. Sellis take it away.
Situated. Okay, so good morning, thank you for having me. You should have in front of you a copy of the presentation, a copy of the summary document, as well as I think one of the big sections that we created that you know all about. So just as our goal, the reason why we have student progression plan is statutory. It is a way to make sure that we do have all the language in our plan for the district. I house this document in my office, but it's a huge community of different departments and people who actually own the different people inside. So this is a list of community members who should check this out. As always throughout the document, there are non-substantive edits, links to the handbooks that have been updated, language that's added or clarified or changed. We always have to update the state assessment part every year, and then we have the different appendices for budget changes. One thing I didn't put in the summary change document this year because it was like repetitive throughout, and I didn't see like the need to make the summary document 47 pages long. There was an overall change you'll see throughout when you look at the whole entire document, where student services was changed to call them through readiness when we were talking about school counselors and school counseling services and some of the different guidance services. In the past, there's something we probably didn't clean it up when I left the campus a few years ago. As we're kind of going through and cleaning up issues. So you'll see some of the times your student services is stricken through and calling the readiness department is added in. And that's just something we changed to the school council that went to our department several years ago. So that was a cleanup. And then you also see throughout the document that I did not necessarily like in the summary, where we did some elements of people first language. So in several pieces of the document, we talked about low performing students. We changed that to students with simple reading deficiencies, just looking at that people first language, as well as we changed exceptional students to students with disabilities. And that's just an equity and access piece that we're looking at that people first language. And then finally, again, something that's throughout in several spaces, geometry as one of the options for getting that graduation high school credit, not credit, the assessment piece taken care of is throughout the document. It's mentioned in the middle school section, the high school section, mentioned over and over in several sections. I did not put every single one of those in the summary change either. I just wanted to highlight that change. One of the things I wanted to point out this year, so starting next school year, we've been phasing in the state requirement to change our concordance scores over the last 2 years. So starting next year, or next year's seniors is the first group of seniors that's impacted by the increase of the SAT concordance score. Previously to this, our seniors, the concordance was at 430 on the evidence-based reading and writing. It's now at 480 moving forward. That's a big jump. It will, our schools and our teachers, our leaders are working on this change, but this will be the first year piece of fruition where that actually is the test score. We no longer have the FERTs either for math, algebra, and writing. This is the first year that it goes out, starting 21-22 school year. So we'll be very much doing the ACT, that reading, writing average. That seems to be somewhat more at the end of the school sometimes with you. So you'll see some ACT coming in alongside the SAT if you prepare for the year. Like the SAT with a partnership. I wanted to let you all know that that's a big change that's coming next year. So just be aware of what we're looking forward, making sure our students are able to attain either the FSA score or those two concordance that have shifted for us.
So they still have the SAT, but stuff the first.
Yeah, and we have the PSAT for math. So that PSAT concordance for math is the MSAT, the grade one, is there instead of.
So have you crunched any sort of numbers as to what that impact looks like for kids who?
Some of our schools have. I don't have a percentage for you.
50 points is big, so I'd expect that would be a big number of people
yes,
that would fall in that.
the ACT being that average of reading and writing is where I think we'll start seeing some of the shift happening. This year we had ACT school day at our school. That was one of the things that I think the CARES funding provided to all of our students, and we will see that in the future. We will see that we make sure that our students have the ACT possibility as well as an SAT possibility. This wasn't something we had always done in the past because we had kind of that SAT safety net. Now we're just going to make sure we have ACT available as well. Okay. Now I'm going to jump to this document quickly. Okay. So the first change that I highlighted in our same document was the addition of the word alternatively placed, and we're talking about our students coming in from other districts. So previously it only referred to as expelled out-of-county students who would be possibly not placed right within our schools, but a student who is alternatively placed in another district and from our district would also be considered for alternative placement within our district as well. So before we just referenced expelled students, but we went ahead and added the language in for alternative place students to be considered for the best placement as well. It could be alternatively placed, wouldn't necessarily be one of our their zone school, depending on what they're transferring in with. Also on page 7, we added in like a section to really specify some home education. So there's a whole home education webpage. It manually goes into all of these different pieces and guidelines, but what we'll just reference here. But what we did was kind of capture some of those highlighted pieces, and this is within the admission, enrollments, and transfer piece of the student progression plan. So none of this is new information. It's kind of held it all together here, so it made more sense. You have to dig through the whole document, kind of piece out home education information. On page 17, this is an example of this piece about student needs and home education students, and we put that on page 7 instead of the education. And then on page 19, there was a small section here about virtual options in the school, and again, since we added a whole virtual section to the end of the video, this was removed from here because it's all included in the other section that we added. And that's everything within that first section of the transfer of enrollment pieces. And our next substantive change comes on page 32 within our elementary section. This language you're going to see repeated in all 3 sections. So we added just a clarifier that, and it's actually duplicated, it's actually written down on page 7 of this page. But the teacher grades may assign grades based on the current Board of Grade level standards. It's mentioned elsewhere within the same document, like right underneath it, but we felt important to kind of put it within the pieces that we're talking about exactly what we graded.
So I know this has been a popular question, and in fact, one that has come my way many times from various parents. They say, okay, my kid has a notebook check. What standard is that? I'm not sure what standard that is, just to make sure that the notebook's complete, or my kid has to do some random thing. Oh, did they get this permission slip signed? You get 100 in the grade book if your permission slip is signed. My kid didn't bring back the permission slip. What standard is that? I don't know what standard that is. That's not standard. Right. So does this kind of curb some of that, or?
I mean, that's the goal, right? And we've been working on this for years. We've got our bulletin points, that's not in here, but our boards and pieces, which notebook check's not one of those. And so I think it's continuing to educate and talk with teachers as we see these things come up, having these conversations with the school leaders in the future. All right, let's think about where that falls. Let's think about that cover. Specifically state, so I think it's just coming back, and as those are occurring, we have the conversations.
Yeah, and from the teacher side, I mean, I can certainly appreciate the idea that my students are organized, that I want them to have their stuff. But I guess when conflict isn't the content more important, right? that's the charge from the state is that we need to deliver and teach this content, and grading that. So I guess you got to figure out that balance.
Right, so it's walking that fine line.
How do you
So,
enforce that still without the grade?
correct, and this language is kind of helping us to get that direction.
So maybe this might be an appropriate time to pose this question, because I think it falls on page 33, which is kind of in this section here. As you're reading there, and there are some grounds for the parent to appeal whether or not something is aligned or so on and so forth. There's a section in it that says the principal decision is final. And somebody brought that up to me this year saying, why is the principal decision final? I said, I don't know, 6 years ago I got burned on that very same one too, where I knew that this was in conflict with the school board policy. The principal said, I know it's in violation, but I'm going to go with it anyway. So I was like, I should have another course of action, but I know the principal's violating the school board policy. Why is the principal's decision final? They don't have the authority to make school board policy. So why is that line in there? Can we take that out? So that exists in both elementary, middle, and high school.
Yeah, it would be in all three.
Right. I don't know why there wouldn't be a further course of action. And from that point, if you disagree with the principal, then typically, I guess maybe that tier up to the regional director to kind of weigh in and say, okay, well, let's look at this a little closer. Maybe an assistant superintendent. I mean, I think the majority don't go all the way up to the superintendent, but so is it like a superintendent or designee sort of situation? I don't know.
Well, I have a problem with removing that statement. I don't believe that the principal should be able to just randomly say something that's in violation of school board policy. But I believe there are other things in place. If you have a principal out there violating school board policy, there are already things in place to handle that principal. I would hope that the majority of our school leaders are not randomly violating school policy. I think by virtue of the job description given by the state for a principal, it's important that a principal, as a leader of the school, be able to run their school. I do believe that there should always be a way that people can appeal something that's clearly in defiance of board policy, because only the board has the ability to make a policy. But I think to just take it out is going to open us up to a whole lot of district level people having to get involved in school things that probably could be handled at a school level. So I would ask us to proceed with that with caution.
So, but there's got to be some course of action though, right?
Absolutely.
But the problem is the policy as written. So I appeal, and I know that this is, for instance, and I'm going to go back 6 years ago, how I got stuck on this one. Was that social studies grades were being counted as science grades. And I said, well, that's a different subject. Why is it even in the science grade? I'm sorry, that's just the way we do it. And I followed that whole process. Principal result is final. I go, well, what? That's the way it stands? Absolutely. This is where the buck stops. Social studies grades will be counted as science grades. That's not the intent. But there was no other way to take that beyond. This year I heard from a parent who said, this is not even aligned to any bit of standards. Why is this being counted as my kid's grade? I said, well, here's the progression plan. Went through the progression plan, got to the principal. Principal said, I know it's not aligned, but we're going to count it. They don't have to include all the grades. Not most of them. Most of them are standards based. This one's not. Boom, that's where it stopped. It couldn't go any further because the principal decision was final. And so, I mean, I certainly love the autonomy for a principal to be able to run their school, but they're just not the end authority.
Granted, they're not the end authority, but the principal has a supervisor. And it's just like if you have a judge who violates a law. There has to be a consequence for that judge, and there has to be someone who's going to act on that. So I think if you have a principal, and I agree with you, if you've got someone giving a child credit for a grade that they earned in social studies as a science grade, I mean, that's very wrong. You don't have to be a principal to know that. So I think that in a case like that, absolutely something should be done and there should be some accountability for it. But I think there are people in place for that. Principals have supervisors. Principals have evaluators. Principals don't just get to randomly say, well, I think that's okay, so we're gonna do it, or they shouldn't, in my opinion. I
You're
think they should be held to whatever the policy is, and if the policy clearly states that it's a social studies grade, it needs to come from social studies assignments.
And I absolutely 100% agree. The problem is the policy says the principal's decision is final. So even if, so they can interpret this however they want, and there was no other way to say, why is it final? It violates the line 3 lines above it. My decision's final.
Wouldn't it fall under a different section? Go ahead, Superintendent.
I believe that was the intent of adding this language, is to make sure that whatever is being graded is connected to the grade level standards in the course for which the grade's being assigned. And so I think it's pretty clear. I think that certainly you're not assigning science grades to a social studies course because those are the standards that are being assessed.
Right, but that already existed. It already said our policy had already broken out where science grades go and where social studies grades go. The principal still said, "This is my decision, and that's the way it's going to be." So, what allows the next step when clearly this doesn't allow it? This just allows the principal to do whatever they want at that point, to interpret it however they want, and.
I think it follows from the previous statute in 15, where promotion and retention decisions rest with the principal. I think that's where that's coming from, an attempt to kind of clarify where that comes in the statute, that it does rest with the principal. But we can certainly, I think we do, when situations arise, move to the red or move to the other departments that are involved.
But that's not what the policy says.
But let me ask this question. So if a principal says you can use science grades for social studies grades, then they're violating school board policy. Does that not fall under out of this now progression plan that you can go to a supervisor of the principal because they're violating policy versus in the pupil progression plan? I'm just asking.
But you
It
would think so.
should.
It's in conflict.
It should.
And they do.
And we have a progression plan here, and then we have school policy.
Right.
If you were instructed by your principal to do something wrong, faculty or teacher, then the next step is see the meeting of the ladder. You would put this saddle.
Right. This is from the parent side, but when you read this whole paragraph about how a parent appeals, the farthest they can go is the principal, and that's where it stops. And so when the principal has misinterpreted this policy, you have no other course of action.
I had
principal
somebody
results
actually call me and I just tell them, give them the name of the regional director to contact. So
Yeah.
I
Well,
don't
it's
know.
a different problem then.
Right.
It's
Right.
not the
Problem.
grade, it's that the
Right.
principal has made a poor decision, and it needs to be checked by whoever their supervisor is.
But we as a school board have given them the authority to make that poor decision and have allowed them to have that autonomy to do so without saying, here's one that, okay, if your decision isn't right, there's another course to reverse that. Somebody else can tell you. But under this policy that we as a school board have put in place, whatever they say goes.
But if I just heard before, the statute gives that.
About promotion and retention. But this is not promotion and retention. This is just, hey.
It's getting you towards the promotion, right?
I think I'd like a legal opinion on this one. Or can you all maybe?
What are you advocating that you say? Because
Just
again,
take that
this is
line out. Just take the line out.
Clearly, if you violate a policy, school board policy, that's in a whole different category of student progression today, right? Or am I missing something?
Well, in the appeal process, we have given the principal the ultimate authority to decide whether or not something is aligned to the standards. That the regional director doesn't get to weigh in on that. The superintendent doesn't get to weigh in that because we as a school board said the principal has the final decision on whether or not something aligns to the standards and therefore should be graded or not. And I think most times, maybe 99 out of 100, the principal will get it right. I have no doubt about that.
Right.
But the problem is, and I've heard from people that, wait, I've gone through the principal and now I'm at the end. You're right. There is no other appeal.
But when you heard that, what did you do with it?
I said, that's a good reminder about what happened to me. I'm going to bring that up on the student progression plan this year. So here I am.
When you send that parent to the regional director to report that? Right.
So this parent had the progression plan in front of her and said, the problem is your document says the principal's decision is final. And I said, you're right, that's the problem. So the principal has the ultimate authority. You can't go any further according to the school board approved document.
Progression plan.
That's right.
But they violated policy. which is a whole different
Well,
animal.
no, because it's up for interpretation, because it's whether or not this assignment aligns to the standards. So I think it was about
social studies. You're given a science grade.
well that was an
Straightforward.
extreme case where that was 6 years ago. But this particular case, I think, was about notebook checks, which does not align to the standards, and so
Which there is no standard.
because there's no standard about did I keep all my papers, you know,
Right.
and so that said my kid's getting bad grades on this, but knows the content. I've gone through the appeal process. Teacher says it's going to stand. I've gone to the principal because that's what it says. Principal says it's going to stand. And so now what? I said, I don't know, because the document that we as a school board approved said we gave ultimate authority to the principal. So you can't go any further. I don't know what to do for you.
But playing it out, I just want to stay because I'm a scenario based
Yeah,
person. So when that all happened and you couldn't do anything for them, what did happen? Did it just die, or
Yeah,
did
they're
you
stuck
mention it to the
But let me,
superintendent or anybody?
No, I followed our document. So I said I'm going to bring it up in our meeting and talk about student progression plan. So that's what I'm doing. So I got a quorum of the board,
so you go to the regional director.
but that's not what the approval
No, I'm
process
asking,
says.
I'm asking. And if the regional director says it stands, like, how do you just want to say, or like, I don't know how far up you go on this
I
document.
think just leave that out and let our natural appeal process prevail. Like so if for instance at graduation we saw students come forth and said, hey, I've got some sort of issue, and the principal tries to resolve it at the local level, and what happens if we disagree with their decision? The parent then emails us and we forward it along, and the superintendent or one of her designees takes care of it and looks at the issue a little closer to see, okay, did the principal make the right decision? Yes, I'm going to support the principal. I'm going to tell you, sorry, it stands. Or if, in an unlikely case, the principal's decision maybe was not the best one in that moment, then somebody from the district level has to be able to step in and have that authority to do so. My concern is that this seems to be like the only area in all of our operations that the principal or that the superintendent or any of her assistants or regional directors can't come in and interpret, because our policy for how a parent appeals the alignment to a standard stops at the principal. So I think if you just take that out, then our normal process would prevail in everywhere else that we do.
But everywhere else, the principal is the authority.
There are issues that come to us.
No. That's what I'm saying.
Hey, I disagreed on
What I'm saying is if there was a parent that had an issue with this, like they contacted you,
Mm-hmm.
my natural response would have been to notify the regional director. We would have gotten engaged, and I typically copied the superintendent. So it wouldn't have sat with, in my world. I would handle it maybe differently. That's all.
So then we would handle it outside of what our written policy says to do that. That's my problem. I just want to make policy align with our practice.
The principal violated the policy, so hence I'm getting the regional director, their supervisor, engaged, and copying the superintendent. I mean, I'm just telling you how I would handle it. That's all.
But in this case, I think the principal will say I'm not violating policy because the authority says that I've got.
Conversation's going to move at a higher level away from us. I mean, we're not controlling that principal, but it would move to the regional director, and they would have that conversation. Just like the graduation thing, you're absolutely right that I had one case this year where it got a little dicey and it got handled.
That's right.
So, but so I don't know what to say.
I'm just trying to make.
I just think we already have this. I think we already have the. Maybe we need to clarify that.
But,
Or
right.
I'm not.
I think we've got the practice in place.
Right.
But this policy, as written, doesn't match the
Well,
practice.
this is a plan, progression plan.
That's right, and it's the process for appealing assignments.
Anybody else got an opinion on this?
I think if that's what we're doing anyway, to take it out. I hear what Mrs. Cunningham said though. I don't want people just bypassing the principal
Right.
and going to regs, but I don't know how often that would handle. It depends on how many times this comes up, right? That how many times do
Or you
teachers
add a whole separate paragraph that says.
No, I think
No,
he's
I
just
don't
saying
think you do.
remove that section, and then you would, if somebody contacted me and said, and this was an instance that I had, that this assignment is outside of the scope of sequence for second grade, then I would say, please contact your principal and let them know and have the conversation. And if they came back and said, the principal said the grade stands, then I could say, well, then here's Mr. Fellner's.
That's right. Yes.
So it's just taking that line out. I'm okay with it. I think it would be nice to get some feedback next year to see if they were inundated with grade changes. I don't think they will, because I think what Mark said is 99% of the time. the principal makes the decision, right? That, right, 90% of the time, we're not having this discussion. So I'm not sure it would inundate. I don't know that it would inundate. Just delete the sentence and
I don't think I've ever had this discussion, even as principal.
so.
It's bizarre that I just keep finding myself at the center of this. I don't know, you know. But
We call Mark on.
That's right. That's right.
You might use a liaison.
That's right.
I'm sorry, would you read the statute again? There was a statute that you referred to.
It's the statute in 15 that speaks to promotion and retention decisions. But I think in 16, we're looking at when a teacher and a parent are meeting without administration presence. Sometimes there is, they don't agree on what should happen. And then the principal is brought in to hear from the teacher and the parent based on where the disagreement may lie with regard to grading practices, assessment, or retention, or whatever that issue may be. And then the principal is allowed to then be the mediator and make the decision with regard to that situation. I still think that if there was some discontent, we would hear about it.
But maybe not, because some people are intimidated when they meet with the principal. I mean, I see that as a point. And then they're on Facebook.
Like if and I even think that the majority of the situations after the parent has met with the principal, even if they disagree, they're gonna be like, okay, you're the principal, boom, I'm done. But I mean, for this couple of situations where they are just so passionate and so right about this, I still don't see this as being aligned to your standards. Why are you grading this? There's gotta just be another person who can sit down with the principal and go, okay, what's this?
If it boils down to a promotion or retention situation, they do have that autonomy in the statute.
Right, but it's not promotion or retention. It's just
a changing of, if you're speaking of a change or a grade or something that shouldn't be.
That's really good.
Right, that might be a
Promotion
little different.
anyway.
But if it comes down, and I think that's where that statement was coming from, is usually it is a situation of promotion or retention that becomes a factor.
I will say, like, thinking from a student advocate standpoint, especially now that the high school, I can see the high school emphasis. I feel like elementary and middle school, your GPA isn't as important to you, but when you get into high school, it certainly is. And if we're talking about a grade that can make the difference between an A or a B in a weighted class, and this could be a significant conversation for a parent to have. I'm okay with deleting the sentence. Should we say that? I'm okay with it. I would love some feedback next year if the regional directors come back and say that was a mistake. I would love that feedback, but I don't. Ms. Cunningham said she's never had it, and she was a school administrator for a long time. So
I think 99.99% of the
okay,
time.
I heard you say a statistic, and I didn't hear what it was. That's why I was like, okay, 90%.
Our principals don't just draw a line in the sand and say, nope. No, I'm in charge, and that's how it's
right.
going to be. I mean,
Right.
they're going to look at the standards, look at the assignment, and if they have questions, they might contact the regional director to say, what do you think?
Right.
But ultimately, the
Hopefully they
voice
would.
of the final decision is still coming from them, but they always reach out. They reach out to their colleagues and say, hey, here's the assignment. They have conversation about that. They don't just say, nope, I'm the authority, and that's what I said, and nope, it doesn't match the standard, but I'm going to go with the grade anyways. They just don't look at fabulous leaders.
Sometimes they do.
They don't do that.
If we
Otherwise,
strike
we
it,
got a call.
we have no way to finalize either. So I think we need to, she has a suggestion, but if we strike it, there is no final determination.
Then I feel it leaves it kind of really open. Because then I feel like it could waffle, maybe depending on who
Yeah, this is just a
contact.
workshop anyway. We've got like a zillion people on the committee.
Yes.
Can y'all
I think she's already captured
Yeah,
something
I
that
was
she wanted to
thinking
recommend.
something like this. The principal, in collaboration with their regional executive directors, findings fall into the conference shall be put to add in collaboration with their reg. So it's not just the principal solely. It would be in collaboration with their reg, so that if we do bump up against one of those hard facts that we're doing, there's someone else to check in before the final.
And that doesn't force. I mean, does that have to force them to go check with their red on every? I don't want that to happen. I don't want that pendulum to swing so far where suddenly the principal has no authority. Just in that off case where they.
I think that, like we're talking about 99% of the time, that this, you don't even know this is here.
That's right.
Like,
Well,
most of them are going back to the language. I think
Yeah, because I don't want that.
An opportunity so that we don't have that hard fast stop. So when we do come across one of the situations that doesn't match, we have recourse
Yes.
without completely striking and taking out principals' full authority.
It is difficult though when you get a phone call from a parent that this isn't a clear document. I have had that case where as well where I've gone back and I was going to bring it up, so I'll just bring it up to you now that we don't, and I know why we don't have this. We don't have a defined like how many days or weeks does a student or does a teacher have to put a grade in the grade book, and that's difficult to have. I mean, I pull up the language; it says reasonable. Well, you define reasonable to me, and I'll define reasonable to you. And I do think the parents that see this line are the parents who are invested in their children's education to a higher standard. They're looking out for their students' GPA. So it's that group of people that we're hearing from when these arguments come into play. But you're right; 90% of them probably don't look at this document.
That's right.
So.
Until they need to look at it.
That's right.
Until they need to. Until they call us and I say, well, let me direct you to the student progression plan.
But you're suggesting that in collaboration?
But we don't want it to always be.
But it doesn't always need to be. Right. Because oftentimes the parent is like, okay, I understand, or I may not agree, but okay, So in those cases, it doesn't need to escalate.
Well, if everybody's said in collaboration, so the only time you collaborate is if you're at an impasse, right? I mean, so they're not going to call their red. So I just looked. I did not know what you were saying. I said, say red. I don't know who that is.
So let me work with the Reds on this language to make sure that they're okay with how it ends up being worded, and then when we come for final next week, we'll have that language for you again.
Cool. Okay.
Okay. So let's go to the next one is on 41 and 42. So this is language clarification for our students with disabilities about their waivers. And that was actually their middle school section already, sorry. Then you'll see again on page 46 that based on current Florida grade level local standards, that language is repeated. You'll see that in the high school section as well. And then on page 50, you'll see the language change to align with our current K-12 reading plan. Every year as our reading plan shifts and adjusts slightly, it does require some matching within the student progression plan. So that's what that was on the first two. And then we're into the high school section. So here we're speaking of early graduation. That's the section that this piece is in. There's oftentimes just different situations that occur with students based on when they're graduating, what scenarios come up. And so here it used to say that the parents or students should consult student services, and we have to consult the school principal on that. Student services, again, this is more like a college grading piece too. Since graduation, lives at the school and kind of more in my office with activities with them to the activities student services anymore. And then on page 63, I propose that we just strike this completely as unnecessary language in my opinion. And the committee, as we talked about it, talks about which courses are excluded for high school graduation, like for credit in high school. None of these scenarios are even available in our school district, so I wasn't really sure why I needed to be in there. They do literally say not operating in one time, and the first one there's not even scheduled to do 9 elective remedial. Like that's not the way that we schedule. It's not how we do that. So I propose that we strike that whole section. I didn't see it as necessary. On page 65, which was about last year, or the year before actually, I noticed this year that this is the academic acceleration section, where we talk about our advanced placement courses, our new enrollment courses, capping, all of that, our Cambridge program information. So I added that language to match what we have for our other programs in the district. In that same section, Lake Sumter asked that I just clarify the clipping piece on that line. You'll see the student would earn college credit as well if the equivalent course is listed in their rule of includes. So we want to make sure not just giving you random credit that you need to for it has to actually be listed and an option to get credit for it. The next change is that same repeated language about the standards and observances in all three sections. And then on page 76. This is another alignment with our reading plan. Make sure that we're all on the same page with those adjustments. And then at number 5 here, schools must frequently monitor. So this school board rule has changed. It used to say a minimum of 3 times per year. Now it says we must frequently monitor. So we didn't want to be governed through the school board rule with like incorrect information. So we changed our language to match the actual school board rules, and we're referencing that there.
So frequently will mean more than 3 times per year? Or
Not necessarily.
frequently can't be twice,
No.
right?
No. I mean, what we currently do is 3 times per year with the LSAs. So it's just, we just want to make sure I'm mapping. We didn't want to be referencing school board's rule that is not accurate anymore.
But twice is not frequently. Right? I don't want to see us looking at data less frequently.
I don't know.
So-
That's not the intention.
Right.
That's not the intention. We don't intend to change our current progress monitoring of our students. It was just an attempt to make sure that our language matched. Language solution. We no longer have 9th graders from 13th graders. And then we have the education standard, and there Mrs. Lyford tuned up a little bit for us to make sure that we can address the issues that an additional formal ID doesn't necessarily be the annual ID that can happen as needed. And then in the appendices, I found a line here that I'm not sure how I didn't see it before. We had a little tiny note at the bottom of our high school minimum promotion criteria section that said individual schools may have criteria which exceeds minimum stages of promotion criteria as identified in this form for time. We don't have use the same promotion regulation criteria as required by the state of Florida and statute. So I left that here. I didn't see that necessary.
Very good.
The last piece is the virtual section. I sent you guys this ahead of time, but this is a big chunk. I want to make sure you were aware that it was here and had plenty of time to look through it. Really what we've done is taken virtual school with this year, virtual school is split. I'm going to say that actually never dropping back down to the 120 kids that used to be before the school year. Probably always will be bigger than it has been in the past. So we felt it was kind of a good time to take those individual pieces that were throughout the plan and some practices and actually put them within our student progression plan. So not all this was documented before within our student progression plan, but it is either statutory or our practices that we're trying to do. It's really broken into 6 sections. The overview really just goes into statute and what we offer the options that we're supposed to and what they're doing. The second section is our student classification, which just explains the difference between how a public school student, a private school student, and a home education student would be or could be enrolled in the different either full-time or part-time pieces of our Lake County virtual school. I think it's important to note in this section that the difference that was noted in both K5 and 612, full-time, the students will take their assessments, all their counseling, all their services will be offered by Lake County Virtual School if you're a full-time virtual student. You're a part-time virtual student, that's when your assessments, your services will be provided by your local school, your own school, your student part-time. So that was one of the differentiations that we felt kind of important to bring about here.
On that section, I have a question about the part-time Lake County Virtual. I think this has been a source of controversy in the past. Is a student going to take some maybe a Lake County virtual course. Some principals have required that the student take that in addition to their full workload to maintain 6 or 7 periods on the campus, whether it's middle or high school, and some have said you can do it in lieu of. Do we give any sort of distinction?
There's not, so that's not necessarily spelled out in here, but we do not, it's come up several times, and I've been called about some of the things, and we've been working with this, it can be in lieu of, it doesn't have to be in addition to, and so I feel that we've gotten to the point where I'm not getting those sometimes when we used to, about they're forcing me to take an additional course on top of my 6 middle or 7 high school courses.
Well, I didn't hear any this year, but I think it was kind of a wacky year with the virtual. Either you were going virtual or you weren't, you know.
Right.
So I don't know if that's
not
part.
the intention.
Right.
They shouldn't have to do, if they don't need it for graduation purposes or for to be considered a full-time student overall. It's not lined up in here.
Yeah. So I guess I'm wondering, should it be? Should we throw a line in there that says that students are not required to take the virtual courses in addition to their standard
And let me
workload?
look, because there is something that references that in the high school section. We talk about the online credit requirement to graduate. It is stated in that section, something like that, but let me cross-reference and see if there is an alignment we put in here. I'll bring it back as a final.
Yeah, I think it most happens. I think that I get this question most often in the context of middle school, particularly in the foreign language, since most of our middle schools don't offer that. Students are going to take that virtually, but they're being told they have to do it in addition to their full workload. Then my next question, I guess, just kind of highlighting, making sure I'm seeing this correctly, is in number 3 of that section. A student beginning the 12th grade school year, they can't come back to a brick and mortar during the year.
So we got a lot of content about December 3rd, and actually, the intention of that is that a student, when you start a virtual course, the grades don't really transfer back. You finish the segment or you don't. So there's always a conversation we have with students when they maybe elect to be virtual in the middle of a course, they haven't completed the course, because they almost have to start over when they get back to the high school or the middle school or whichever section. So we're striking that out. That will be true. Number 3 will not be in there.
Number 3 won't be in there.
I've read it, and I'm like, I've kind of gone back and forth. The virtual school will always have conversations with the student as they're trying to transfer at a time. It doesn't fall neatly between actually completing a segment at the virtual, just because of the hard time. It is difficult to get back into the school and get that credit made up, or that course made up. So the intention of this was to make sure people stay on track for graduation, but it's very prohibitive the way that it's written. And so as we looked at it, I was like, we're just going to take that out.
Yeah, I think that'd be a good idea. This would catch a lot of people by surprise.
Yes.
Wait a second here.
Yes.
I thought my diploma was coming from
Right. Awesome.
you name it.
So that is going to come out. That's a note that I have here.
Okay.
That we will be removing that. And then I will cross-reference the language about the additional course for online. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it's mentioned elsewhere, but we'll make sure that it's here in a way that makes sense for everybody as well. The next piece is the high school graduation piece. And so everyone has to share with us this year. We had more students than ever before. We were clear that if you are full-time enrolled at virtual, and that's the initial requirement, that's where your diploma will come from. Your transcript will be from there, that's where your diploma will be from. If you intend to graduate from your zone school, for example, you have to be enrolled in that zone, back in your zone school before that second semester starts. So during that open enrollment window, you've got to get back to your zone school. So that's what number 2.
I was going to say,
sorry.
go back to Lake County virtual. Okay.
Yeah, you can go back to your flipping order. We like them to go again. It's back to that segment piece. That's why this the part before maybe it's just wording inappropriate, because you've got to get back within the time frames. This is under enrollment. Number 2 talks about a home ed of non-public private associate once you can graduate from Lake County virtual, they have to get enrolled in that window. We have enrollment windows that are statutory. They can't just show up in May and decide, oh, I'm going to go virtual. So you have to be enrolled by a certain time period. And then D is enrollment eligibility. So this is statutory. They have to meet the enrollment criteria just like everybody else, like in the previous parts of the student progression plan. They do have enrollment windows, but these are based on statute. They are open. It's you can see 90 days before the first day of school. They close 30 days before the first day of school so that they have time to do the orientation for the students, get their account set up, get them scheduled, get everything done so that they can be a full-time virtual student, full-time learning. And then for second semester, we have another time frame here. The second semester is not a statutory requirement. We're only statutory required to enroll 1 time a year. We enroll 2 times a year here just to give students options and for them to be flexible. And then see, of course, we want to give ourselves the flexibility. We are time consuming to switch to a virtual environment that falls outside of those 2 windows. And so we want to be able to have that in play as needed for different scenarios that occur. Number 4 just talks about a contract with students who have historically struggled at a kind of level 1 or 2 and moving on that. Just have a contract signed at this moment during that. They will participate at least 1 time a week in tutoring or mediation. Again, this year with the huge increase in virtual school students, we saw for the first time we had several students who were really struggling because it's so reading heavy. When you're in a virtual environment, you really are reading to understand the whole entire time. So we wanted to make sure that we had ourselves something in place that helped our virtual teachers, our virtual administrators, and our students and parents with some supports there, so that we can make sure the students are successful and in the environment where their community can be successful. Any questions on that section? E is about equal re-enrollment. We want to make sure that as we are re-enrolling each year, that the students are following the pacing guidelines, that they are being successful, that they're doing their assessments as re-enrollment for the following school year. And then the final section is on pace and performance. So there are pacing guidelines that are established for each course. That is how attendance and how different pieces are actually evaluated. So there's specifics here about what that looks like. And then the final piece, I added a grading because in the virtual setting, that 6 and that 7, I don't know why those are there, those are going away. The virtual pass and virtual fail with the WP and WF, again, with a large increase of students this year, you will see on transcripts WPs and WFs, which you aren't really accustomed to seeing so many in the past. So I wanted to just explain what those are, just like in the regular part of our student progression plan based on the different grades. WPASS and WP means that the student, when they reviewed, they got past the 28 days into like the probation period, and they're off pace and not doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they're passing, they pass the WP, so withdraw pass. If they're past that 28 days, they're failing, and then it's a WF. So that's what those 2 different keys mean. I wanted that to kind of be in the progression plan that we would be able to reference that in the future.
Any other comments?
So I've got one, and I don't think we've got a decision now on any of this, but I guess it's just one I wanted to throw out on the radar for future discussion. But I think one of the issues that came to light during graduation this year is, I guess, schools have different standards for their Latin honors. What gets you 4.0 here, well, it doesn't get you the same stole there, and so is there some consistency to that, or are schools really just free to create their own standards, whether it's GPA thresholds or percentile rankings? Or I guess I'm confused by that whole piece. The message we got from one parent this year was, I guess the school raised it because they were the lowest. Well, somebody's got to be the lowest, right? Out of 8, you're always going to have the lowest. So, so I don't know. But just thinking about, because I know we have a section here about the various diploma honors you can earn, so on and so forth. It doesn't speak about Latin honors to be honored. So I guess I'm just not sure as to.
So that's something we can work with the principals on this year. It's not delineated in here. I want to say, I'm looking for it. That says the schools can do their own school-based honors and recognition.
Right. So I guess their point, gosh, if my zip code was only different, he would have had the sumo stall instead. Barely got on the podium, So, I don't know. I just wanted to throw that out there because I don't know the answer to this, and I guess it's part of a larger discussion, but maybe it's loosely related.
I heard one about valedictorians that they don't get any kind of overlay or recognition of the program or whatever too. So it would be an interesting conversation. We've had it once before. I think it was back in 14 or 15.
Yeah.
And it was made very apparent that the schools have their traditions and they would like to follow them.
Yeah, it says schools that identify valedictorian improvement or maybe an alternative, and that's where I think we have some the Latin honor something that we put out about that. So
It just seems like your valedictorian is your highest honor, right? Like I don't, and there's no recognition in some places. It's just curious. I don't know if this is the right conversation to have about it. I had another question, but I was going to let Mr. Dodd finish.
I'm done.
Yeah. So I just want to bring up the reasonableness of the grading component again, and I know Martinsworth's ducking. When it comes to the end of the school year and the grades have not been entered, and you can't get a response from the teacher, and you have reached out to the principal, and then the grades get entered in the book a week before the end of the school year, we're not giving opportunity for students to give remediation either. So it just seems that we're setting students up for failure or not for the opportunity. And in this specific case, because it's so recent, even the next course is taught by the same teacher. So there's a couple of students who are like, we're not going to take that course. And it's unfortunate because we don't want them to not continue in the progression if this is a CTE course. If that's the only instructor of record and we're not seeing a change. And so I don't know if there can be discussion about that around language changes in regards to the grading timeline, even if it's as the semester gets to a close. I think again, this goes into that 99.9%, right? This isn't something we come into often, but I've even experienced that personally. And again, this was elementary, so it's not as critical as high school and CTE classes. But when you're not seeing a grade entered for 2 months, that's not reasonable. It's under any circumstance would it be reasonable.
So I'm really glad you brought this up because at the time I was thinking back. I think the LCA contract has a time period of within 1 week that the grades should be entered. And so could we make our school board language match the contract so that the public clearly sees? I've got the same problem, where a teacher will throw in a grade or two for progress reports so something prints.
Yes.
But then the other 9 grades appear, on the teacher workday following the grading period.
Sometimes even after that.
Yeah, right.
Because the teacher workday is the day for the grades aren't due
right.
for another couple of weeks.
That's
and it's
right.
like 2 weeks into the next grading period, and then you see like 6 grades populate, and it's like, how any
Mr. Farnsworth, Chad, are you
directional
looking it up?
decisions.
yeah, and I think it's
So if that already exists, could we throw that line in
Language
here so
exists.
everybody sees it? I think the rule already exists by contract though for teachers.
If it's in the contract, then reasonable would be replaced with what's in the contract.
Yeah, I agree.
100%.
It's not that.
Yeah.
We approve this, but we don't have a contract.
Right.
And then right change.
Right.
We want that one.
But what does it say? Excuse me, I'm sorry. You need to come up to Or if y'all both shout it, it'll get to the microphone. Maybe you can both come up and sing it.
That's right. You can sing, you can dance.
Okay, you got section 16 and 17, and that's where I was trying to differentiate my head because it starts to talk about final grades in one section, and then it talks about assignments, and it's right above that. So to facilitate student and parent monitoring of student progress, timely reporting of grades on the district-approved electronic reporting system is expected. A, regular posting of grades should occur within 1 week of the assignment/assessment due date. B, if a new student enters without a transfer grade, administration, guidance, and/or data clerk will calculate a grade for the teachers to enter.
A comment should be entered by the teacher stating that this grade was not given during their supervision. C. Posting of grades for some assignments/assessments may require additional time. These may include projects, extended writing, and document-based questions, DBQs. And then it goes on to section 17. Reporting of final grades at the conclusion of the first and third marking period will not be required prior to the close of the second workday following said period. A minimum of one of the 2 workdays will be without students present. So that's basically that workday she was mentioning. And then lastly, it says early release will be provided at the end of each semester for the purpose of assisting teachers in administering and grading student examinations at the middle and high school level and providing playing time for teachers at the elementary level. So that's what currently exists. So we can, it's definitely something that can be discussed at bargaining as we prepare to enter full book next time around.
But have they even brought that up as you've gone through these sessions?
We've looked at it in the past, but not under the same context. Where we've looked at it before was that section. I think last time we adjusted it was talking about transfer grades because they wanted some safety net kind of there that, look, if transfer grades are being calculated at a level above the classroom, that they wanted some type of disclaimer.
But if we put it in our progression plan, pretty much day specific after an assignment, right? Would that not then discipline how you're going to negotiate? In other words, we match that right now, which seems reasonable.
Mm-hmm.
Then that would take it off the table for going, okay, we want 3 weeks to grade a paper or whatever.
Currently it should occur within 1 week.
No, that's what I'm saying. If we put 1 week in the progression plan,
Mm-hmm.
then it would be off the table to try and make it 3 weeks, unless, or 2 weeks, or 8 days, whatever.
During a full book negotiation, nothing's off the table. People can bring it. It would just be a matter of us going back and forth. And anytime you ratify contract language, it's going to supersede our board approved.
Okay, but if we had but we were going to be mindful then that it's in our progression plan. So if it came before us, instead of just going, yeah, that sounds good, we will know that we already have it in our progression plan. So which do we want to affect?
I think you're matching your progression plan to this current language. I think you're establishing that as a priority.
That's what I'm saying. So why not put it, instead of reasonable, say, here's what we expect, is all I'm saying.
It already is the expectation. If
it already is the expectation.
Granted, sometimes there is some ebb and flow between when ratification happens or when a board approved happens or when board policy or state statute. But anytime we can get them to match, I think that's a wise thing to do.
Right. But right now, it doesn't match because it just says reasonable.
Right.
And yours, that was very specific.
I looked back because I actually took a screenshot of it, but of course I didn't catch the page number. I just have a screenshot of what it says. I can tell you what it says if you want me to. Yeah. I just gotta find it. Hold on. I had it pulled up a second ago.
And it's not something that constantly comes under dispute as I'm helping schools and teachers and LCA work through their issues. Sometimes it does, but it's usually handled at the building level because the teachers know what the expectations are and the principal gets them on track.
And it has come up randomly in my service.
Mm-hmm.
So I get that it is a concern for parents. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you guys are way more tuned in than folks that reach out to me.
And the advancement in technology and different things that have gone on has become easier and easier for grading to occur. So granted, it does take up a lot of teacher time, but the mountains that probably used to exist, this is probably reasonable at this time.
But 1,000%, I can see the parent who's really engaged and they are watching those grades because how important the GPA is based on the direction they've chosen for their child. Right. Mm-hmm. So if it's taken weeks or whatever, then that's not acceptable. I agree with that. Thank you, Ms. Foxworth.
Right,
That's
that's what I was wondering
we've got
too.
Mrs. Lucas, I think, looking up something.
Well, I have the page. We were just trying to figure out where on the page because it talks about what they can grade.
I think that possibly, and I know Mrs. Sellis is good at integrating words, it may be sufficient to just have a statement that says that teachers will be expected to adhere to their contractual language regarding time limits on the grading and inputting of grades. And that way, when we do have the contract, if there's a change, we don't have to come back and change the policy of the plan. And it also is going to allow, all parties to weigh in. I absolutely agree about the problem with grades not being there. But I think if we lock ourselves into a box and say every week, we may run into some problems because the contract already gives them some exceptions. So since we're not voting today, if you could please work on that language and bring it back to us, I think that would be great.
And I wrote down what you said, like, teachers will be expected to adhere to their contract.
And I think that'll help principals as well because they can work with the union and the contract and make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be
But
doing.
the challenge is that someone reading the student progression plan isn't going to have the union contract.
But the good thing is, if they read that according to contract, then they can ask, what's the contract say? So I don't think before, if a parent was reading this, there wasn't this is the document, and it just says, a clear and understandable method of recording grades shall be maintained, and then a clear and understandable and consistent method of recording and assigning grades shall be maintained. So it didn't, what is that? That's
Right.
very, but at least if this says it's according to the contract, they can say, well, what's the contract say? It gives you a question.
And it is it's a problem.
Yeah, it is. So that's where I found it, Francis. Those two, 3 and 5. It seems repetitive, but.
And it's in every section, so when I do add language to clarify that you'll see at the actual standards of approval, it'll repeat in elementary, middle, and high.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was all I had.
Okay, thank y'all very much. Okay. 3.03. Does anyone need a break? You good? Okay, 3.03.
So I have Ms. Dylan Banks here, Director for Choice and Alternative Ed, and she will be walking through similar process relative to the Student Code of Conduct.
Speak up a little bit. No, it's not on.
Oh, hear it.
You lost it? So what does that mean?
I think that means we have a 3.04.
I need somebody to do something.
Maybe take Kate.
We'll try that now. Oh, I hear myself. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to present the proposed revisions for the 21-22 Code of Student Conduct. You have the items in your packet before you, and they're also available on board docs as well. So not sure if the gentleman can pull those up for the audience. Thank you. I will start with the PowerPoint, and then I will move into the revisions document. And then we have a handout that I'd like to review that came from the state. So our overview PowerPoint has the summary and the basis for our proposed revisions. They're either based on statutes, board rules, alignment to policy, language cleanup, and clarification. On this slide, next slide, thank you. I've just captured the definitions that we will be reviewing today. And as you will notice, there are several items with asterisks that we'll have to discuss with you about some proposed additions back to the Code of Conduct as well. Next slide just shows which items will be aligned to policy and those proposed changes. Next slide is just about the updates to the extracurricular section, which is some guidance from the state. And our next slide talks about the language cleanup and items for clarification. You'll see there are several items on that slide, but we will talk about that when we get to the revisions document.
And our final slide is just to show who helps me prepare this work for you. There's several departments who collaborate with me, as well as individuals from the school and district level. Are there any particular questions before I move into the revisions document? Go for it. Thank you, Mr. Mathias. Always ready to rock and roll. Page 1 of the revisions item is just a summary to show the proposed changes that will be coming to you next week for tentative approval. Our goal is to align to statute and policy. So number 1 is just to clarify language that had been in the code for a while, but we had not captured it as stated in the statute. So that's what that change is. The next item is just to add some clarification to the anonymous reporting tool. And the out-of-school suspension section, we got feedback from schools. They were asking for more clarification in that section as well, as it relates to students being suspended and work being provided to students. We clarified our home education section just to align to policy. Page 2, again, is just the clarification, adding some more clarifying information there. We're requesting that parents update their information annually, just a reminder for that. Next item is again clarification. And public notice was added. We have a section in the code called public notice of information. And over the years, I guess we missed this one. It's been around forever, but it was recommended that we add this language as well. Dating violence is an update to align to our Neola policies, as well as the game-related activity section as well. And then I did reference the Florida High School update as well. Next section, we clarified some language in the Code of Conduct to help our stakeholders understand how we impose discipline. So again, that was brought by our committee members to just clarify some of that language. Next item, we just struck out one little word, but I still wanted to make sure I brought that to your attention for MTSS. And in our tobacco education section, again, just clarifying some information. And then work assignment and work detail. We've had this item in the code for many years, but we realized that we had never added language to address the work assignment piece. So that was also brought up by the committee as well. The next sections you'll see you'll see this item referenced throughout the document. It was also brought to my attention from the committees that that statement went to a more punitive direction. So we added some language to also capture that we use items outside of disciplinary action to work with students to correct behaviors. I'm sorry, can I ask a question? You're going really fast. It's
Oh,
really
I'm
small.
sorry.
That's okay. On the number 42, the last sentence, it says, in addition to possible fines if any student, whether under the age of 21 is not or not, is caught using, possessing, blah, 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 tobacco, nicotine, blah, blah, blah. At schools, may receive a disciplinary consequence. So we changed it from you will receive a disciplinary consequence to you may.
Yes, ma'am, because CESR allows you to send students to tobacco treatment program. So that would be outside of assigning you discipline. You could go to the tobacco education course, which is not a disciplinary action. It's more of an intervention.
Okay.
So that's why it says may, because we don't want schools to think you must assign discipline in these instances. You can refer them to the tobacco education class instead.
But you can only do that once, right? They can't just repeatedly go to class.
Right.
Okay.
You have thoughts on that?
Is that clear? I mean, do your administrators know that?
I believe they do, but if you believe we need to make it clear.
I have no basis for that. It just as a stakeholder, when I read that, I'm like, oh, well, why would you not?
Okay.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Right, I hear you.
I don't know that that's a problem.
Is that a position of others that we maybe want to just make it more definitive? We could do that when I bring it back.
I feel like it's an issue
in
middle and high schools that students are using tobacco products. So I just would hate for a parent to bring this back and say, you may, why are you? I don't know. I just don't want to give anybody
If we
leverage.
have a I believe it's once, correct?
Yes.
Okay, maybe we just need to state that, that's the first offense, they may get an alternative to discipline.
That's right. That's right. 'Cause I felt like there was something else somewhere that in lieu of something or other, you could attend a class. Isn't there another section, or the parent could do something in lieu
remember
of a
that, too.
suspension or something?
That's the parenting class.
Parenting class.
That's right.
That's
And
a
isn't that referenced in here somewhere?
The
Where-
parenting class, not in this particular instance, that's in the suspension section for the first
Right. But in this
suspension.
document.
Yes, sir.
So
it is
in
the
this
code of
document, we
conduct.
said in lieu of this, you could do that. So how about in this same kind of section, we follow that same kind of logic that in lieu of this consequence, you could
First offense.
one time.
I hear about that a lot.
Do you?
From students, not from parents.
Well, I'm
That's
surprised at how often it
interesting.
shows up on our SRD report every day.
It
I'm like,
does.
oh my gosh.
Right. Is it up higher?
Yes.
I was just looking at the last where it says they may, so that in lieu is, I see it.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
It's in there, but does it need to be brought down to the bottom?
I don't know. I just don't. I've read the line that says, in addition to fines, they may receive disciplinary. In my head, I'm thinking, why would we not discipline them? So I don't know if it's just the way that it's.
No, sir. But we were trying to make sure that schools understood they could use the class in lieu of their suspension for the first time. That was the intent. They may not.
All right.
Yes.
That's right.
Right. For disciplinary action.
Yeah. That's what we'll say.
Otherwise, it'd be bizarre, right? You will be disciplined for chewing gum, but you may not be disciplined for
That's why I was
using
like,
tobacco.
this is weird. I can't do this one. Okay.
Well, yeah, that was the goal, to make sure that schools understood that they could send the student to the class versus giving a suspension or a Wednesday school or something like that. So, for suspension. Okay. Action. Yes, sir.
And you say that up there at the top, like the in lieu of first suspension, they may do this, but then at the bottom you say they may get fined and they may get disciplined. So it doesn't. I don't know. It just doesn't flow. It makes one.
Okay, I can definitely take a look at that.
Yeah, that whole thing.
Okay.
I have no idea where we were either because I was really hung up.
That's
trying
okay.
to read
I can
that
go back.
fast.
I had already covered work assignment in detail, and talked about the changes to the language in the corrective strategy section. So I think I was down to where it says page 44, where it talks about the removal of out-of-school suspensions from the level 1 offenses for minor classroom level offenses. That is the recommendation because historically we have not had pass. And now that we have pass and other opportunities for students to correct behavior, the recommendation is to remove the imposition of out-of-school suspension for level. Next item at the top of page 4, I believe that's where I am, is bus misconduct for serious offenses, suspension from school. That would now shift that particular item to a level 2 and removing that from level 1. Next item we just wanted to clarify is just addition to information that's referenced in statute in that section. Contraband also, we just want to make some clarification there for schools to understand where we were just talking about the tobacco education class. So just to go off what Ms. Luke was saying, adding some pieces there to clarify language for schools. There's a note there, I'll come back to that at the end when we talk about the proposed changes from the state. So there's one item that we'll talk about in just a minute there, as well as the weapons change from the state. So we'll talk about that item as well. The bottom item on page 4 is the recommendation to delete the procedures that were outlined about due process because that information is captured in policy. So the goal again is to align the policy. So we're requesting to remove that language and add the paragraphs here and to direct everyone to the reference policies. And then the last page, these are more FYIs. Again, we'll talk about the handout and the additional document that you have as well. The request to remove the medication forms, they are available on the Student Services website. And then the minor change, requested change to the opt-out. It was brought to my attention that we've heard from parents in years past who want to opt out of having their child's name and images available on social media or other media outlets, but they wanted their child captured in yearbook. And our previous form did not give them that option. So we're hoping that this addition to the opt-out form, now we did a lot of work with that last year, but there's a request to add that statement to the current opt-out form.
Yes, and I appreciate you humoring us through all those changes over the years on this opt-out form. I think this has been one that it's been a struggle to get folks to understand from the parent side or the school side whether this form is even required or not. But with this additional component, I guess I'd be interested in seeing what the whole form looks like now to see, does it add any level of confusion? Are people thinking that if they click something, they're getting their vote in the yearbook?
Would you like
That's one of our handouts.
I brought it just for you, Mr. Dodd. I knew you would ask me for it.
I would just hate for somebody to misunderstand what they're reading there, and then suddenly they get their yearbook at the end of the year, and the kid's picture isn't there because they thought they were opting into the yearbook. That I had to check this to be in the yearbook.
I can definitely give this to you.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And we can call and say, read the directions.
That's right. Meanwhile, it's size 3 font.
Are there any questions on the revision sheet before I ask you to turn your attention to handout 1?
Go ahead.
Okay. So if we look at handout 1, these are the proposed revisions from the state for assessor definitions as it relates to student discipline. These items were workshopped at the state level and they're slated for approval July 14th. So I'm excited about one of the changes in this document, which is the weapons chain, the definition that the state is proposing. I don't know if you recall last year or not, we had a lot of conversation about this topic because the state made some changes to their definition, which then impacted our current policies and how we were able to discipline students. So now if you'll look at the page in the back of that I've prepared for you, it's a chart to hopefully give you some clarification. It's in your packet. It's an additional document there. So with the state's position, or their proposed position to change the definition of weapons, this would now give us the ability to hopefully bring back dangerous instruments and the threatening use of dangerous instruments. Because the definition last year, as you can see to your left, was very, very broad. And that forced our hand to make changes in our current policy. So now with their recommended change, it gives us the ability to bring back these definitions and reclassify some of our items because they have been explicit in which statute that they are now referencing as weapons. So that would be an addition, but it would be also something we've used many years here in the district in the past. But last year we had to make that change. And I will say I'm glad that the state did listen to us because I started calling last May. I've even had calls with Ms. Turner with them of our concern of how broad that assessor definition was. So I am pleased that they've referenced statute, which would give us the ability to make this change. And then we would bring back those policy changes to you as well, because that would require us to update a few policies. And I'm prepared to do that here pretty quickly because I am excited about this opportunity to make this change. And that concludes my presentation. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them and try to answer what you may have.
Thank you for your good work.
So one question I seem to have stumbled across a few times this year, I guess tardies, that kind of thing, like a pretty low level sort of offense. And I guess I'm just trying to look for some understanding on these level 1 sorts of offenses, because when you look at the discipline that can be associated with that, it seems to range from everything from like a warning to suddenly you're in school suspended or something. And I think some of the calls I was getting this year were kids were tardy, they were locked out of rooms, suddenly they're assigned to a Saturday school for like 3 hours for being a minute late to class. And is there a level of extremism? Is that something that just occurs truly at the school level, or is there guidance in our code of conduct that better suggests what we do in that sort of situation?
Well, when we're looking at tardies and them being level 1s, there is a broad range of assignment of discipline that can be assigned to students. And because schools have their discipline plans or discipline ladders, administration's given that autonomy to make those assignments of discipline. So it is very broad in the code of conduct.
Yeah.
And I agree with you. It does
Right.
give them different options based on what is. So for me, it's my first offense, I may receive a warning. But if I'm tardy multiple times, I have 7 tardies, then I may land in school suspension on a discipline ladder.
Yeah, and I guess I'm thinking back to this one particular period where the school was doing these lockout periods. So there was like, there's no regard for whether a student for a student's history on this, whether they were late that one time or repeatedly late. Everybody, sorry, this was our lockout period. So you had to report to, I don't know, the cafeteria or some other building and receive your detention or Saturday school or whatever it was. Superintendent was very helpful on that one. I don't know if you recall all this, but then we were kind of going back through on an individual basis, removing tardies for people or removing their. So I wonder if part of this problem is that this section is just so broad for what you do.
I wasn't
Do you recall
aware
that?
of that situation. So I'm kind of lost.
You probably had a lot on your plate this year.
So I kind of missed that.
So, but you would help me intervene with the school
Right.
going, and I was like, wow, is Saturday school really 3 hours long? So if you were a couple minutes late to class, now you got to show up on a Saturday, and.
Are you saying that they just gave everybody the same consequence?
That's right.
No
Everybody
matter
who was
where the student
who was
fell
late that
on the
certain
ladder?
period,
Okay.
boom, here's your consequence. Because this is our magic tardy period or what have you. But I mean, outside of that, I don't know, because this section is just so broad as to
Right.
what consequence you can.
But
Here's
it
your
sounds
warning.
by
Oh,
design broad, right?
And it is by
So it's by
design
design.
broad because of the discipline ladders and
Sure.
the different school-based decisions that have to be made by student. So in order to lock a school in, again,
yeah.
would be not giving that principal their statutory, authority as well.
So that happens again. I guess we just
Right.
go back and say, okay.
Deal with it then.
I mean,
seems
it's
to be
becoming a
extreme,
Because I don't think
systemic
we want to
issue.
micromanage every single thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's it? Anybody else? Okay, thanks.
I can give you more details later.
Thank you so
I would
much.
agree that we probably just need to deal with these. I mean, it came up once and over the course of a year, and we did they were very willing to go back and make some concessions and look at it on a more individual basis. But I certainly don't want to be micromanaging every decision that an administrator makes by trying to say if you have 3 tardies, this happens, 4 tardies, because every child scenario is different, but they're always open to look at every child and their situation and alter accordingly. So.
And I agree with that philosophy, and that's where I get frustrated with the state, where they micromanage us in terms of the disciplines on the dress code, right? Doesn't it say for first offense it's this,
It does.
second offense it's that, third offense it's that? Why do we not have some autonomy on that? I don't know.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, Mr. Mock. And I do need to take a break.
thank you.
Anybody wanna take like a 3-minute break? Yep, okay. We're gonna do a 5-minute break while you set up. Okay, we're back for a little break. We'll start off with public input from Mr. Yoakum, the chairman of the Audit Committee for the Lake County School Board. If you'll give us your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
Vance Yoakum, 12619 Milwaukee Avenue, Tavares. You notice I've got Kylene Fisher's old koozie here for elections. She would agree with everything I'm going to say, so I just wanted to point that out. What I wanted to do is basically just give you a little sales pitch on some of the reasons why we are bringing this audit plan to you, and I sent you an email yesterday with some backup information about some issues. And I'd like to thank Ms. Cunningham for showing up at the audit committee. She asked some pretty good questions, and it resulted in a discussion and maybe a couple things that we added to the list.
primary issues is that this is to discuss an audit plan and also the justification for expanding the audit staff, whether it's through hiring someone, as you discussed in the previous meeting, or you go outside and bring in somebody to fill some of the need. The purpose of the risk audit database that Tom created was to give you a list of a lot of these audit areas that are potential areas for auditing. One of the barriers that I've seen in the past that I just wanted to bring up is that there's a lot of areas where people say, well, the internal auditor doesn't know education, doesn't know teaching, doesn't know a lot of these things, and so therefore they shouldn't have access to them. In the past, we've talked about auditing schools, and the previous superintendent just wouldn't let that happen. And my view is that everywhere I worked as an internal auditor for many years, we had full access to audit any risk area. And that would include areas that I think have never been touched by an outside review here. You just had two presentations here where they had a lot of very complex regulations and standards and everything else. And that to me alone are some areas that maybe, and you talked about some things where there have been exceptions and nobody is following them. And that's called a compliance review. And you could call it a standards review or something like that, but that could be folded into any review of school. The schools, as I mentioned and we brought up at the meeting, is that if you have an audit committee, if you have an auditor that hasn't got the skills, and I've dealt with ready mix plants, I've dealt with manufacturing and human resources, you bring in a borrowed person who is very knowledgeable to add the critique, and at the same time, then they are exposed to management controls and the concepts which would benefit them in their future career. As I pointed out in the memo, there's some corporations and organizations that do provide those. They borrow people from other areas to expose them to management control procedures. So what I would suggest is that you make the decision. You're going to decide whether you think the items on that risk list and others that we haven't even discussed. We haven't discussed the progression plan compliance, the union agreement compliance, the fact that at the recent meeting you had a consent agenda section on school items. All those red circled areas are areas that talk about spending. And why not look at those because that probably is in a different department that may not have, you at least need to have a third-party review of that process. And so I would charge right ahead and give them 5 auditors and go from there. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Mark.
Great. Okay. My presentation today, I'll kind of skip through the first couple of slides real quick, but the second slide, risk methodology. I sat down individually with each of you and going over that. The risk methodology is in these handouts, Plan 1 and Plan 2. And the first 17 pages in both of those are the exact same. So don't read one, then pick up the other and read the second, because their first 17 pages are going to be the same for both. The only thing I'll point to on this slide is the very end. And if you remember last year when I had the audit of the district auditor's office, one of the recommendations was the organization or the school district implementing an enterprise-wide risk management process. Mr. Yoakum is also advocating that as well, that we implement something like that so that we can measure the risk across the school district. And you're not getting my opinion, but usually this is a committee that comes together and they measure these risks in the school district. That then is used in the process of the internal audit plan. The next slide, this was just the process to come up with the internal audit plan from my initial meeting with the audit committee chair all the way through the May 19th where we talked about additional resources, then the audit committee meeting where we discussed those resources as well as the audit plan. and then today's workshop, and then looking forward to pushing forward one of these plans, either Plan 1 or 2, for the next school board meeting for final approval. The next slide obviously use assumptions to come up with these audit plans. And obviously the assumption is, are we going to hire additional resources or bring in more outsourced work to be able to meet the plan number 1. Plan number 2 would obviously just be resources as they currently are. And that's the next slide. You can see Plan 1 on the left, Plan 2 on the right. Plan 1 looks at hiring a new auditor. Obviously, we can't have him day 1, him or her. That person would obviously come in after the hiring process is complete. I estimate would be October, November timeframe. And then, of course, some outsource hours in that internal audit plan as well. Plan 2 would be current resources that we've had for the past 7 years, and with some outsource hours for doing some, the construction audit work, which the board has requested last year that we do it as an outsourced function.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, sir.
Before we get too deep in this. So when I brought this subject up because you had an audit committee meeting the next day.
Yes.
And to discuss whether or not we were that there was a consensus that we needed another auditor, or I brought up the possibility of outsourcing audits.
Mm-hmm.
What was the results of that meeting, whether Plan A or Plan B? What was the results of that discussion?
It pretty much like the board meeting, at least in my mind, it came a little split. There were some advocates to getting the resources, but there's also some on the fence, I guess, as far as whether we need to add resources to the district auditor's office at this time. I didn't really see much difference because it was really nice because I met with you on the 19th, I met with them on the 20th, and I left both meetings going, I don't know which plan to submit.
Okay, but the intent was to drill down between that committee that works directly with you, was to drill it down and come back with a recommendation from them. And so the recommendation from them was, they don't.
Their recommendation is to come up, because they're advisory to you, to come up and talk to you, hopefully to help convince you or solidify in your mind.
Sunshine, so I'm asking you. Okay, Vance, you're chairman. Please come back up. And you were here for that. You were here for that meeting where I really wanted, after this meeting, for there to be a recommendation from your committee, either Plan A or Plan B. So what did y'all come up with?
Well, I'd have to say that we probably did not come up with a hard decision on that. My approach was that to provide you, the board, with the information and the risk database for you to look at that, because you get into the schools a lot more. I've got three of the people on that committee never worked in $1 billion corporation at the levels that we're talking about. They don't have risk background or anything else. And so I basically punted probably in saying that come to you. I didn't even think about having a vote there.
Okay, I'm good with the punt. I'll catch it.
Okay.
All right, next.
Well, that's what I was kind of saying. I don't think they were willing to jump 1 foot in or 1 foot out as far as making that decision. Next slide is just basically the plans. You saw the plan for internal audit plan 1, which is the one that would need the additional resources, would need some outsourcing of audit, and then plan 2, which you haven't seen. I trimmed it down. I call it trimming it down, but trimmed it back to roughly 10 audits, which number 2 and number 3 are the construction audits, which are bringing those to a close. I think I would have just a little bit of pay act auditing to do, so I put about 40 hours there because those projects will obviously not finish this year. They'll still be ongoing into the 21-22 school year. And then the architectural contract review, which is to be redone this year, and the operations department would like some help in getting some recommendations in that contract review. So with that, I put down the other audits, the Chromebook, the pre-construction work I would do for Aurelia Cole Academy. Still doing the copy review, the grounds and the warehouse, and then on the other page, doing the grant for COVID-19 and doing 2 school operational audits myself towards the end of the school year. So with that, that's my, I'd like to be able to, obviously, since we can't vote, obviously just to measure the discussion to figure out which plan to bring forward on Monday, for final approval.
Before we talk about the plan for final approval, and I mentioned this to Mr. Mock, that there's some considerations I'd like to make to the plan, whichever plan. One of the things that we talked about last summer was raising the cost of ELC. I think there's some programs in the summer. There's not some programs in the summer. There's some dollars allocated to schools. We're covering red line schools that don't bring in enough money. So I thought it might be nice to have Mr. Mock look at ELC operations, expenditures, all of that. So I wanted to add that. Him and I discussed whether it would be a full audit or whether it would just be one of his special projects because he has time already allocated in his proposed internal audit plan for next year that would allocate special projects. I think it's difficult for him to say whether it'd be a full audit without getting into the scope of the work in that initial time frame to see if it would qualify under a special audit or if it would be an audit or just a special project. So that was one that I thought would be beneficial. The other one that I haven't spoken to you about, but I thought about this weekend when I was looking at the numbers associated with your risk assessment, was we have with the millage, the 3/4 millage money, and all of the mental health liaisons and the nurses and the past teachers. I would just, when we talk about like procedures and how we are operating within those parameters of those people that we've added, that would be beneficial just to see how schools are using those people and there's consistency of what the way that we stated that we want to use them is being done. How are they? That's all I'm going to say about that. There's been some things that I've heard that have given me a moment's pause. So I just didn't know if you guys would be agreeable to standard operating procedures, maybe around all of the dollars we're spending on our mental health liaisons, past teachers, school nurses, everybody else in that, social workers, psychologists. Like we have a large group of people. What is that? I'd like to see one of your flow charts. Student, how does it flow? That's just my suggestions. I wanted to put out there.
I thought he was going to jump out of his chair when you said flowchart.
I know. I'm
love
excited.
It. I know. I love flowcharts.
They do communicate. I lost my voice this week on the ball field. Classic. Anyway, I do think they communicate. Sometimes they allow us to see the way things flow, and it'd be nice to see that ebb and flow in different schools, different regions.
I would absolutely concur on the ELC. I think that has long since been something. I think perhaps since the past and the mental health liaisons were added in my absence, I don't really know enough about those to have an opinion about that one, but I definitely would support the ELC.
Both your ideas are great.
I'm totally fine. But are we going to move something? Is that a special project? Because I also want to speak about, so, Mr. Yoakum, you brought up this compliance audit, which is sort of your state brush over, walk through. And if you smell something, bring it back for more in depth. And that's what you're speaking about. Right? So,
in the past, I haven't been doing compliance audits per se because the boards, when I got hired, the board wanted me to do audits that would be value added, help find areas to reduce costs. So that's been kind of the main thrust in where I'm looking at to pick up audits, not necessarily looking for compliance, because to do compliance audits, they're all over the place. I mean, I'm just saying you can pick them up everywhere. Anything can practically be audited. So
But you have a
if you're
sense
looking to
about,
be compliant.
you would have a sense about where we spend the most money, right? And
That's what I'm looking at
those
where
are
you're
the
spending the
areas
money.
that may or may not be on our radar. Like, I'm not exactly sure what we're expecting from a Chromebook audit. I'm not sure exactly.
Well, that's an area of compliance because we've spent over $11 million on Chromebooks.
But if you did kind of an overview, and if you came back and said, I think there are specific concerns in this area,
Yeah.
right? That's sort of more what I've always looked for from you.
Yeah.
And in the case where we're giving some very specific direction, Mrs. Cunningham, then obviously you want to test the water and then come back to us. Do you think there is an issue? And then if there's an issue, then this board will give you more direction about what we want you to focus on. Does that kind of make sense? It seems like you've been dangling. You go and do audits, but is it really the meat of what we're trying, what this board is trying to get to when it comes to what an internal auditor should be checking? I don't know. And I think I'm just rambling, but y'all get the sense that.
To that sense, I mean,
I don't
this
get a
board
sense.
has not changed any direction that I initially got from. I think you were the only one here back when I got hired.
You were hired, right?
When I was hired, so.
And an area for me that was, and I really didn't have a way of articulating it until I had a chance to speak with Mr. Yocum before he was gave me some clarity to the same language you guys use.
Yeah.
and so, but I really have always expected you have the assessment and the high, medium, low risk, that kind of stuff. And I've always thought, well, that's the kind of thing if the district employees are giving you information, which was part of the interview, and then at one point they did their own internal interview, they're establishing the risk. That's not really what I want an internal auditor to do.
Right.
You should be sniffing around the water cooler and looking for areas that you think are of concern. Do a high level evaluation, this compliance audit, and then come back if you think there is smoke or you see smoke, is there fire? And let this board then give you direction to go look at that. That I think would be more productive. In some areas, and I'm going to tell you up front, I'm good number two because I'm not in favor of hiring another person. At least now, I'd rather outsource professionals in specific fields that we feel like we need. This board needs to be based on. So that's where my head's at. Was that clear at all?
Real clear.
Okay. Okay. Next. So what do you take off to add the special?
I don't know. I did because he had some room for special projects. Like if you look at the both of them.
Special projects hotline audit work.
Right. So we didn't know when him and I discussed the ELC if that would fall under a special project because we're not sure the size of it, what that looks like. And then I'm not. So when I was looking through it, I was thinking, hold on, that's 10 one. When I was looking, is the grounds and maintenance and warehouse, that's a follow-up, is that right, Mr. Mike? Did I interpret that right? That's a follow-up?
Which one?
The maintenance, grounds and warehouse.
No, that one's not. The copier printer would be more of a follow-up.
The new contract. The grounds and maintenance was a new one.
Yes, I haven't done that.
Okay. No, I didn't. I have not considered what to take off. Let me just answer that rather than try those.
Right.
So we need to kind of begin. But again, how do you even know unless
you
just get an overview, right? And then that's where I think
finding out what the objective and the scope of the audit would be.
Right.
This document ought to be fluid enough that it can pivot on a dime. That if you did the compliance part, you went in and said, "I think there are issues," then this board should say, "I'm not really interested in the Chromebook right now. You dive on that. It's big dollars. Number one, it's going to be driven by dollars. What is at risk? What are we looking at? What are we looking for?" I think that as we move forward, to asking voters to again do the millage increase, we ought to get ahead and make sure that we really have been the fiduciary of
spending the money
and good stewards of those dollars, right?
Yes.
So that'd be a nice one to do. Again, kind of a compliant overview. And then if you went, hey, I'm sniffing something right.
Mhm.
Then we go,
Go deeper.
dig in on that, right?
Same thing with the ELC, like I said, with not knowing if that'll be.
And then
Assessment.
what is a school? What do you envision that school audit?
That was the attachment that Mr. Yoakum sent to you. It covers what it does is, and I've done this audit with a Fortune 500 company. Back then, it was called a branch. And when we went into a branch, we looked at how they were operating efficiently and effectively. We weren't looking at their sales. We weren't looking to see if they were going out and selling their products to their customers. What we're looking at is the operations of that facility. Is it being operated efficiently and effectively? And what areas could be improved to potentially save money or to bring in compliance with the policies and procedures of the organization? I'm looking at a school as the same thing. It's not a branch, it's a school. Obviously, there's things that they're doing operationally in that school. And like you said, maybe it's compliance with areas. Are they complying with the policies and procedures? Are there areas where maybe they could save money? Maybe they could operate a little bit more efficiently and lower their electric utility bills by 10%. Who knows? That's off the top of my head without knowing.
And the idea was to benchmark like an elementary level high school, maybe again, this whole
Yeah.
client overview, and see what that school cost to operate. What does that machine look like in chemical consumption, toilet paper, towels, soap, you know what I mean?
And
And to have that,
Yep.
again, I think it's helpful to get involved. Well, in the past, the interpretation was you would get involved and start looking around at how many teachers they have or whatever. That's not discussed.
That's not.
It really is a plant review, not academic.
And sometimes it's also best practices. Some schools find ways to be more efficient and effective that maybe another school hasn't thought of. Those audits can share those ideas with another school. Have you ever thought of doing this
That's
to
where I thought that
improve
was positive,
this
to be
process?
very honest. I thought that would be positive. It would bring best practices of schools.
Yep.
And the ones we pick would be what we think are the best schools.
That's where it's a nice place to start. It's nice to start at the best and then work down to the others, because then you can share those
Well,
ideas.
then you have data that you can compare
Yes.
the other schools.
Correct.
Benchmark. If it's like you got one that spends a whole lot more money on toilet paper,
Yep.
then maybe they got a toilet paper that fall. I'm just
Yeah. I mean, you got the idea. I mean, that's how you can do things more efficiently and effectively, though.
Check on the wax.
so.
It's just sharing ideas at the end of the day.
How much more? Because you're doing the payouts, right?
I am doing the payouts, yes.
And
I can't tell you how many more because it depends on how many more months there are to go till we finish the project.
I got it, but you need to be doing the payouts, I guess.
The payouts are actually if you pay the outside, like I said, it's $180 an hour for them to do it, and it's $45 an hour for me to do it, not counting some of my overhead. So I think I'm more cost efficient in doing the payouts because of the amount of time it takes to go through one.
I'm just looking at the hours. Just trying to figure it out.
And what you want them to do is you want them to, at the very end, is to go through the contract and apply what was done at the end, right? And to see if everything aligns.
Is there one that
And if the payouts, going through payouts is clerical, is it possible it's less than $180? So we don't need that level.
Yeah, they give us a blended rate.
Maybe we need to look at how we're negotiating that part, right?
We are. That's how we do.
What is the 1 week training that you're doing? Seminars and training. 40 hours.
That's me for my continuing education.
And what continuing education is that?
For my certified internal auditors, I'm required to do 40 hours a year.
That's some kind of internet.
I use webinars a lot for those. A lot of times I eat lunch while I'm doing them, so.
Doesn't matter if you're illness for it.
I know.
It's on the hours. Okay. Okay, so you're planning on bringing this to us the 7th, and I totally don't think
No, the 14th.
Oh, the 14th. Oh, yeah, 14th.
Today's the 7th.
I don't think we're ready to vote on something the 14th, personally.
What do we need to do next then? Do we need to have a special meeting?
I just gave my opinion.
Yeah.
What, to vote on his plan or to
Yeah,
vote on,
he said
so figuring out if we were gonna switch something out for the.
I guess he's not ready.
So we're all landing on number 2. Is that what we're
I
saying?
think we're
That's what I
measuring the discussion. We're landing on number 2.
I looked at
which
your watch
Elizabeth is like,
screen as I said that.
I was really only going to bring number 2 because I kind of measured that out between the audit committee and here that's where we were going to land this year anyways, this plan 2, which is kind of the normal hours.
My disappointment is that when I brought this up in order for you guys to have a conversation on that Thursday, that it didn't come back more definitive. I am disappointed by that. So, and you knew that I wanted that, right? So I'm kind of clear about that. So without any other information in the split from the old committee, I'm number 2. End of the story for me. I'm actually less than a number 2.
You're allowed to say that. So it'd be okay for me to say I'm okay with plan 2 also. Okay. I just don't know that we're in a position yet to make a decision about plan number 1 and bringing somebody on. I think there's a lot to consider in regards to bringing on somebody else, but I do think that the importance of the internal audit position is indisputable in regards to the oversight, the organization, the person that's going to communicate in regards to what audit we need. And I just feel like there's a little bit more buy-in in regards to internal, being somebody that does consultant work outside of school districts with other school districts. This is my home, this is my buy-in, this is the place that I serve to my greatest capacity versus having an outsource where you may or may not get that buy-in, but you also still, I wonder who would fall on, would it fall on Mr. Ward then to say this is the plan that we're going to do, and would he be the person that would be attached to it? Would there be any political affiliations or pressure from an outside agency versus an internal auditor that reports directly back to us? So I think there's a lot of stuff to still consider in regards to outsourcing versus keeping it internal, but I still think we're ready for plan number 2 if we're going to prepare for 21-22 school year.
Well, it seems like we're no closer. Well, I don't think we are closer to figuring out some of the split on this, keeping the audit department the size it is or expanding it. I guess, I mean, I'm still of the opinion that there are so many untouched areas that are certainly outside of Mr. Mock's expertise, and so, I mean, I would be of the opinion that I would like to hire somebody who has area of expertise in one of these, and maybe that kind of eliminates some of your outsourcing. Like if you hire somebody specifically for construction audits, that is your criteria. Could we bring that in house?
Orange County does. Their rate of construction is so much greater than ours, but we do have a lot of projects coming up and related to construction.
Mm-hmm.
They have an IT specialist, a construction specialist.
To create another position because we have some construction going on. I mean,
Right.
No, but he's got 7 audits on here. But in plan number 1, 7 of the audits are related to construction with an outsource cost of $122,000. Could we hire somebody for less than $122,000 and have them in house?
For how long?
but you're paying Tom 100 plus benefits, so it's a wash.
Yeah. Is it 100?
And it goes away. His position, when there's no construction, you don't have any.
But we have construction on our plan every year because we have sales tax rolling in, and every year we've got this many projects going on. Do we not? So that's part of my opinion. The other part of me, I guess, going back to the curriculum side, I know that we have a very active curriculum department, but I don't know if I were them, I'd be interested in knowing what is the level of compliance of, hey, how many teachers are teaching the standard or not teaching the standard, or we roll out various this vision for teaching and learning. How many people are following that? How many are not? I mean, from the curriculum side, that'd be of interest. I just think there's so many areas that are untouched that are.
Well, I'm not certain, me personally, that we hire an auditor with how many people are doing standards. Yeah. Assistant superintendent of teaching and learning.
But that's all done internally.
Huh?
I guess I'm saying that's all done internally. Like, and their manpower is very limited. So, like, I know they're out there doing walkthroughs. Their department, and it's all done internally.
Regional directors. principals, I don't know.
So how is that all that compiled? Is my
Well, number one is not, this isn't even what we're talking about right this minute.
well, it's
We're
related.
really trying to decide one or two, but that would be something that there's no question about that you'd have to hire someone, a consultant.
That's right.
No question about that. And I think that we saw the benefit very fair, just being fair, when we outsourced the construction audits that person brought from working with multiple counties. He brought years of experience with multiple counties to us, where we hire someone to get pigeonholed to just Lake County. And if we're hiring someone for an audit, I want the best and brightest doing the audit, not the fact, Thomas is not against Redistricting, but not someone that's on the job training first and then goes to the audit, because they're being fed, from the district perspective, information, and are we really getting the right numbers? That's always been a bit of a concern of mine. So,
to be fair, the statement you just made has been something I've thought too. Like, if he's meeting with our department heads first and getting the scope of work from the department heads, then he is getting Lake County's perspective of that. I don't know. I do agree with that statement.
But we could, I guess, for the benefit of the 14, we need this to move ahead. Move forward plan 2, knowing that the internal auditor is the other person that works for this board. And the problem, I think, that moving since 8 years that we've been together, that the board has never taken a real interest in what he's doing.
Agree.
And he answers to 5 different people, 5 heads. And so that could be a really bad thing, or if you ask for something and you're in favor, then he'll be on it. If someone else asks, then I think the board votes. So that has been my personal experience. So,
plus the opinion of the board has changed over the years, and it's never been fed to me, except for in a session like this when I'm sitting here going, now you're telling me?
No, there's been a tour where you've been.
Well, individual meetings, I get.
That's wrong.
Well, individual meetings, I do get some input, but that's not the whole. So.
I don't think we have done this enough.
Correct. That's what I'm trying to drive at, is I haven't heard.
No, I'm saying that the board owns, if we get to this point and empirically we roll in, roll out, we approve, move ahead, and that I don't think, because I haven't had the votes, that it's a time for us to have a discussion. And I did say early on, I enjoyed the fact, I told you in our private meetings, so this is nothing
Yeah, I know.
that I appreciate you coming from the business sector, but I also am disappointed it takes so long. The learning curve is so long on every audit that's just a disappointment to me. Now, does that mean that I think we need to eliminate your position, Tom? I'll be straight up. The answer about that is yes. but a weak yes, because I think that if we define audits, if this board really got engaged, and if we defined what we wanted audited, then we had consultants come in and answer to us. Keep in mind that function answers to us, whether it's Tom or it's a construction company or whatever, and they go through and make their presentations to the audit committee, so you have that extra control. But I'm also way okay, because the weak yes on the yes about do we need to have your position was no. But I think that the position, you stay in the position and managing those audits with more engagement, then maybe we've all been productive. That's where my head's at.
Yeah, the prior auditor before I came on board did 3 audits a year, roughly 3 to 4, and then everything else was outsourced. So they did about the same thing. I think he did 7 to 10 audits based on what I saw.
Well, if we had that plan, and if your nature was to manage those, and I see that productive also, by the way.
Because who would that fall on? Who would manage?
We have a person that's our guy. Well, by statute, to join Scott Ward, for example, and with the audit committee of Brian Scott. Yes.
Is that not a conflict of interest if the auditor reports?
No, they still report to us. It's just you have to have a manager. You got to have someone that's managing and making sure these audits are being timely and in the scope. But we have never sat down and really had a complete workshop on what do we want Tom to do. And that is not, so that is So I'm sorry for that part. But we've reached a point now where, particularly if we feel like we need two people, that it's appropriate to have this conversation, because I'm not sure the one person has got exactly, and I'm not sure this board, unless we change our habits, would benefit to having two people.
As the new person, I think I agree exactly with most of what Mr. Mathias just said. The part about, I think it's very important that we as a board, if you are going to have to try and deal with the five of us with our individual concerns as well as our group concerns, as a new person, I think it would be extremely helpful if we did have conversations about priorities and what we expect, making it very clear to you what we want. And then that way, I would like to express some appreciation to Mr. Yoakum. Thank you for your email over the weekend. It provided me with a lot of clarification. I think everyone else has kind of weighed in on what, if they had to vote today. I think I can't say that. Okay, I can't say that. So what I will say is that it's a lot to go through, and I do appreciate your hard work. But it does leave me with concerns. Just by looking at the list, I have lots of questions.
So one of my major concerns is how many $700 million organizations have one person looking at that. And if we're doing something so radically different, why do we think that we are different than all these other organizations?
Did you not see the list of the number that outsource districts?
I did. Mm-hmm.
And so why did they outsource when they're larger than us?
But I also saw how many people these people have internally, and it's far more than one.
Yeah, but you also, we had a qualification of that, because some that are doing payroll were part of those numbers that were added. And so,
in some places, right?
Internal funds.
Internal funds.
Internal funds
Internal
audits. Yes, not payroll.
I'm sorry, did I say payroll?
Yeah.
I meant internal funds.
Internal funds.
So what if we say going forward, Tom's going to bring his train. We are not in a position, I think, at this point to make a decision about outsourcing versus internal. I would like to see it have a little bit more time to process that information and get some more, because I've scraped the surface. I've reached out to another district. I've talked to them. I have another document I read in regards to, it's like the National Organization of Internal Audits. It talks about the requirements statutorily and who they report to and management response and all of those types of things. But to make a decision, I would want a little bit more time to analyze that information. So in regards to the 21-22 school year and the plan, are we going forward with what we have with plan 1 or plan 2? Because we're the decision that it needs to happen Monday.
Yep.
Or are we postponing that decision and making the bigger decision, and then he'll get his plan later?
I think to move forward for the 14, that obviously number 2 is the choice of preference. And then we have a deeper discussion. Because we have 3.
They haven't said. Have they said?
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a preference, a preference,
Okay,
and a
okay,
preference.
okay.
So there's 3 preferences. Or preference, you want 1. Anyway.
But we probably should schedule some of the workshop about this bigger conversation, because it's for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, because we don't have, I have a ballpark of what hiring external would be. And so, do we have a conversation? We need to have that conversation in sunshine.
Right.
Okay. So it sounds like, Mark, you okay with plan 2?
I have to be.
Can't vote.
You don't have to. No. We're gonna. He has to do a plan forward. Are you okay with bringing it forward? But that's okay. If you feel like, I don't want you to feel like it's under duress, but it is 12:30.
Yep. I think it's just under the duress of majority rules.
Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Thanks. Okay. Board member comments.
Oh, we're not done.
Over there.
I'll go.
Ms. Luke?
Graduation was phenomenal. I wanted to thank Mr. Clark and Mr. Barnsworth. We had a really nice time. There was no rain. Eustis High School, there's always just a sense of great stuff when it comes to students graduating, and there's always some fun, some good laughs, and some good time with good people. It's just such a celebratory experience, and so thank you to all the schools. I know that it's extra time, and the students enjoy it, and the families enjoy it, and I enjoy it, and so I just want to say thanks for that, and congratulations to all of our graduating seniors. I also wanted to, I have a couple people to thank. Commissioner Smith came to the high school last week and honored the Eustis High School State Championship softball team as well. Provided just a small ceremony for them, but took the time to write them all a letter, a congratulatory letter, which was really nice of him to do. The city of Eustis held a parade for the girls as well that went right through downtown, and Tim Totten donated the banners. And I'm going to tell you guys, until you have a kid whose banner is posted in Eustis, you just don't understand the pride that comes along with that. So it was very, just extremely embraced by the community to be such a big deal for those girls and the accomplishment this season. The Daily Commercial, the Orlando Sentinel, have also been very, I don't know what the right word is other than amazing to embrace these girls the way they have. Our pitcher was named Pitcher of the Year. Our coach was named Coach of the Year. The accolades just continue to roll in, and we're honoring the girls next week at our regular school board meeting as well. So I just wanted to say thank you to the community and to the stakeholders that have really encouraged and embraced these girls, that they've experienced something I don't think many get to experience, and it's just been a community-wide embrace. So we are appreciative of that. And I think that's it. I'm looking at my notes, but I think that was it. So thanks.
Yes, and I also want to go out there. The graduation was amazing. To be able to, I had the chance to go celebrate with the East Ridge High School kids, and it was nice to not have the pressure or stress as to whether or not a graduation would be able to even happen. There was no question about that. So that was a nice weight off the shoulders there, and so. I feel so excited for these kids to be able to have lived out their senior year, at least with not having that pressure of whether or not we'll get a ceremony. And speaking of ceremonies, the other piece I wanted to throw out, once again, some bit of thanks. I know from folks from the district who worked on this, as well as the Ed Foundation. We had a closing ceremony for Claremont Middle School, and as we know, we'll make way for the new Aurelia Cole Academy. And this ceremony was so exciting because there were so many students and teachers and former teachers, former graduates of the high school when it was there, and all in attendance. And it was so well attended, and I think rather meaningful, especially as we watched the flag come down and with the trumpeting to go along with that. So I thought it was just so well done, and I had a chance to speak with a few different members of the alumni who graduated from there, and they're just so excited about being able to own a piece of history when that auction comes to be, as we were able to sell off some artifacts from that school and put that to a good cause. Thanks.
Okay,
Well, I got to attend a couple of high school graduations and a couple of middle schools, and I think the thing that was significant to me about graduation was I attended Lake Hills and Lake Success. And we hear a lot about the high schools, and certainly completing 12 years with a regular diploma is an amazing thing. But to watch the kids at Lake Hills and to see the kids at Lake Success, that was totally different. And I came away thinking what a wonderful organization to be a part of, because at Lake Success, they only had 2 graduates, one of which I had known since he was a very young person. And the most remarkable thing about the entire thing was afterwards he came up to me and he said, "I bet you didn't think in the 6th grade you'd ever see me in a cap and gown, huh?" And I'm not going to answer that. But what I will say is that I was extremely pleased to see him be able to receive his diploma. And that made me feel just really fortunate to be a part of the organization. So it was a good time in Lake County. And that's it.
So I was able to attend Lake Mineola High School and South Lake High School, and had the opportunity to shake hands with over 800 of our young future leaders. And I don't know what it was about this graduation, but the kids just seemed different. Like they were more resilient. It was a different group that came through, and I'm very proud for all those young men and women. But almost more important to that, and this board had some part of it at one point, is Jamie Jo Johnson had reached out, and combined with the Blaze family, sort of did this spontaneous pie raid for our 2018 Teacher of the Year, Tammy Jerkins. And Tammy is extremely ill. The parade, we all lined up at United Methodist Camp, over 100 cars of alumni and fellow teachers and kids, and drove by her house honking horns with a full police escort from the Leesburg Police Department. The sheriff had the citizens on patrol. And what an amazing tribute to someone who gave their life educating an example as Teacher of the Year to other educators. And then to have that tribute, and of course, if this board remembers, we had made some policy changes and we named the media center after Tammy in 2018. So I'm very grateful that we did that while she was well enough to really appreciate it. And it was just really, really moving to be there. I also, this was left, it's in an envelope, guys, this Umatilla Through Their Eyes. And before the board meeting, I just grabbed a couple of the stories. And what an amazing composition of this, right? So I'm looking forward to, I don't know that I'll read every single one of them, but I will catch some. So thank you very much, whoever sent this. I'm not sure who it was, probably the principal.
Mrs. Roman, it was the librarian.
The librarian put this together?
Yes.
It's really awesome. And so that's, I hope everyone has an amazing summer. I know that we're excited about summer school starting today or tomorrow or next week. Okay, whenever it starts, I know we're excited about it. And that's all I have. Superintendent?
May I interrupt before yours because I want to give you, I also wanted to shout out, I went to Lake Virtual's graduation. I totally forgot because it was a little bit later. It wasn't in the same time frame. The superintendent and Mr. Feltner also attended, and it was, you guys, you talk about the atmosphere, like they were driving through, and they would get out, and they would come up on the stage and take pictures, and it was like a big party. Mr. King did the announcements. It was super great. And then afterwards, they celebrated their teachers who were also retiring. So I just thank you for giving me the opportunity to shout out to them too.
Yeah, you bet.
Okay.
Superintendent?
You guys were busy. Y'all were everywhere over the past week. So thank you for all your support and all the engagement. And yes, the graduations were amazing. They were all fun. And that one was especially fun. It was like just a big party. And lots to celebrate. And I just wanted to make sure that we gave a big shout out to April Dempsey. She's the food service manager at Grassy Lake. You probably saw the email on Friday. She was announced by the Department of Education as a finalist for Florida School-Related Employee of the Year. So we'll look forward to the outcome of that. And just congratulations to April. Job well done. And just happy summer. Yeah, lots going on.
Okay, Elizabeth. Perfect. Meeting adjourned.